The necklace hit the marble floor with a sound so small it shouldn't have meant anything. But in that lobby under those chandeliers, in front of those people, that tiny sound was the end of everything. Preston Vale, the hotel manager, straightened his jacket and smiled. Not the kind of smile that meant he was happy. The kind that meant he had already decided what this moment was going to look like before it happened. He turned to the crowd gathering in the Sterling Crown lobby and said it loud enough for everyone to hear. 9 years. And this is who she really was. Zariah Bell stood there in her housekeeping uniform, the emerald necklace at her feet, 200 eyes pressing down on her like weight. She had been carrying her whole life, but never this heavy, never this public. She hadn't stolen anything. But nobody in that room was asking. If that had happened to you, if someone destroyed 9 years of your life in 30 seconds, in front of a crowd that was already laughing, what would you do? Would you fight? Would you break? Would you even know how to breathe? Stay with me, because this story is about to go somewhere none of those people in that lobby ever expected. And if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now, because every week I bring you stories that will make you feel something real. Drop your city or country in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if this one moves you, hit that like button. It tells me you want more. Now, let's go back to where it all began. Zariah Bell had never been the kind of woman who expected mornings to be kind to her. She had learned that early, somewhere between her father's funeral, when she was 12, and the moment, 3 weeks later, when her mother sat down at the kitchen table in their South Side apartment and said, very quietly, that they were going to have to figure some things out. That was how her mother talked about hard things. Figuring things out. Like life was a math problem that just needed a little more time. Zariah was 29 now. She had been figuring things out for a long time. She woke that Thursday morning at 4:47 a.m., 13 minutes before her alarm, which was something her body had started doing on its own years ago, a kind of preemptive surrender to the day. She lay in the dark of her bedroom in the apartment she shared with her mother on West Garfield, listening to the sound of Chicago in the early hours. Buses, distant sirens, the particular creak of the radiator that meant winter was still deciding whether to leave. Her mother, Delphine, was already awake in the kitchen. Zariah could smell coffee and hear the low murmur of a morning gospel program. Her mother kept on, at a volume barely above silence, out of consideration for neighbors she would never meet. That was Delphine Bell. Consideration for strangers. Gentleness toward a world that had not always been gentle back. Zariah pulled herself upright and sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, the way she always did, not dramatic, just practical. Her body needed a second. It always had. She was a large woman, and she had made peace with that in the way you make peace with a thing that other people never stop noticing, even when you yourself have stopped thinking about it. Her weight was hers. Her body was hers. The opinions of strangers in hotel lobbies had no lease on either. She just wished the opinions of strangers in hotel lobbies would act like it. She dressed in the bathroom with the door closed because she didn't want her mother to see the dark circles. Delphine worried too easily and too quietly, which was somehow worse than loud worrying. Zariah could handle a fight. She didn't know how to handle her mother's careful, silent concern. The Sterling Crown Hotel was 45 minutes by train from Garfield, and Zariah had made that commute so many times that her body ran it on autopilot through the turnstile. Second car from the back, window seat if available, eyes forward otherwise. She had her headphones in, but no music playing. She had started doing that years ago as a kind of social armor. Nobody bothered a woman with headphones in, even if all she was really doing was listening to the train. She was thinking about June. That was what she called him in her head. June. Not June, Seok, which was his full name, and the name he introduced himself with when they met 4 months ago at the small Korean-owned cafe near the hotel where she stopped every Thursday morning for a coffee she technically couldn't afford. He had been at the counter ahead of her, and he had turned and handed her a cup before she even reached the register. "It's getting cold outside," he had said, as if that explained it. She had almost given it back. She was not accustomed to accepting things from men she didn't know, especially men who looked the way he looked, expensive, without trying to be, contained in a way that made you wonder what was underneath. But there was something about the way he said it. No performance in it. Just a man handing a woman a coffee on a cold morning. She kept it. That was how it started. And in the 4 months since, it had grown into something she didn't have a word for, yet something quieter than romance and more serious than friendship. He brought her coffee after her shifts sometimes, appearing in the lobby of a cafe a block from the hotel's service entrance. Like he had nowhere else to be, which she knew couldn't be true because a man like Joon-Seok Kwon always had somewhere else to be. He just chose not to be there. He asked her questions and listened to the answers. That was rarer than she wanted to admit. She knew he was wealthy. She had gathered that from the small things, the quality of his coat, the particular calm of a man who has never had to wonder whether his card would be declined. He had mentioned the logistics companies, in the way people mention what they do when they're not interested in being defined by it. She hadn't pressed. She respected the privacy of people who weren't trying to impress her. She would think about that decision later. She would think about it a great deal. The Sterling Crown Hotel rose 44 floors above Michigan Avenue, like a declaration. The kind of building that was designed to make people feel small upon entering, and succeeded. Zariah had worked there for 9 years, and she still felt it, sometimes the weight of the marble and gold, and the particular light they used in the lobby that made wealthy people look like they belonged, and made everyone else look like a question mark. She came in through the service entrance. She always came in through the service entrance. That was the invisible architecture of a place like this, the public face, and the back corridors that kept the public face functioning. Zariah knew every inch of the back corridors. She knew which elevator stuck between the 14th and 15th floors if you held the button too long, and she knew which rooms' ventilation systems made noise after midnight, and which guests would leave a $5 bill folded under a pillow and which ones would leave nothing, and a bathtub that made her question humanity. She knew the 16th floor the way she knew her own apartment. She had cleaned penthouse 1,608 a dozen times in the past year. It was always reserved for guests of a particular category, the kind of wealth that didn't ask prices, because asking prices was for people who needed to consider them. That week it was occupied by Lenora Whitcomb. Zariah had formed no strong opinion of Lenora Whitcomb beyond what was necessary. She was 61, traveled with 2 personal assistants, and a wardrobe that required its own room, and tipped in a way that communicated. She understood tipping was required without suggesting. She thought the person receiving it was worth more than the minimum. She made small remarks, not always direct enough to be confronted, but pointed enough to land. The kind of woman who had learned to be cruel in a way that gave her plausible deniability. That morning, Zariah clocked in, collected her cart, and started on the 14th floor as scheduled. It was routine. It was always routine. She had a system. She had always had a system, and the system was what kept the work from wearing her down entirely. She moved through the rooms with the efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times, which she had, approximately. Changed linens, wiped surfaces, replaced amenities, checked behind doors and under beds because guests forgot things, and forgotten things became complaints. She reached the 16th floor at 10:14 a.m. The penthouse suite had a do not disturb placard when she arrived, which was unusual for that hour. She logged it, waited the required 15 minutes, and knocked. No answer. She used her master key, as policy required for late morning turnovers, and entered. The suite was empty, or it appeared to be. She worked quickly and carefully, the way she always did in the high-floor suites, not because she was nervous, but because these were the rooms where any mistake became a catastrophe. She had learned that from her first year. A single glass left unpolished, a single pillow at the wrong angle, and a guest like Lenora Whitcomb would be in Preston Vale's office within the hour. She was changing out the bathroom hand towels when she heard a sound from the sitting area. She stopped. It was nothing, probably the ventilation. These old buildings breathed. She finished the towels, moved back into the main room to check the arrangement of the sitting area, and that was when she noticed that the door to the interior bedroom was slightly open, not fully, just a few inches, in a way that suggested someone had pulled it almost, but not quite closed. Zariah stood very still for a moment. Then she knocked on the open door. Housekeeping. I apologize for this interruption. I'll come back later if needed. No answer. She pushed the door gently and found the room empty. She exhaled. She was losing her mind. Long days did that. She straightened the bedding, aligned the pillows, and left the penthouse suite at 10:47 a.m., pulling her cart behind her and not thinking twice about the bedroom door, or the sound she thought she heard, or the fact that she had spent 33 minutes inside that suite and had seen something she did not yet understand she had seen. She would understand it later. By then, it would almost be too late. The rest of the morning was ordinary. This was the thing nobody told you about the moments that broke your life in half. They arrived, without warning, without atmosphere, after hours of complete normalcy. You could be in the middle of thinking about what to have for dinner, and the floor could open underneath you. Zariah finished her shift floor assignments, took her lunch break in the staff locker room with her coworker Marvine, a 50-something woman from Grenada who had been at the Sterling Crown 3 years longer than Zariah and maintained a deep and abiding skepticism of anything management told her. "Preston's in a mood," Marvine said, unwrapping a sandwich with the focused energy of a woman who refused to let anyone ruin her lunch. Had Devin restacked the lobby cart twice this morning for no reason? Preston's always in a mood. This one's different. Nervous-type mood. Like a man who knows something's about to land on him. Zariah filed that away and forgot about it immediately because she had floors to finish and she was thinking about June, who had texted her that morning that he would come by after her shift. Just a short text. "I'll be there at 6. I'll bring the good coffee." She had read it twice and then put her phone away because she didn't need Marvine's commentary. She was back on the floor by 12:30. At 3:15 p.m., her radio crackled. "Bell. Management needs you on 16 now." The voice was clipped, formal in a way that the interstaff radio wasn't usually formal. Zariah felt a small tightening in her chest, the low-grade alarm system that had been running in the background of her life since childhood, and told it to be quiet. She went up to 16. Preston Vale was standing in the corridor outside 1608 with 2 security officers and a woman Zariah recognized as one of Lenora Whitcomb's personal assistants. The assistant's face was carefully neutral, which was its own kind of message. Preston looked at Zariah, the way certain people looked at her like they had already reached a conclusion and were simply waiting for the evidence to organize itself to match. "You were in this suite this morning," he said. "Yes." Standard turnover at the assigned time. "Mrs. Whitcomb reports that a piece of jewelry is missing. An emerald necklace. Family heirloom." He paused. Not for dramatic effect, she would think later. Because he was actually enjoying it. "You were the last housekeeping staff inside." Zariah kept her face even. "I didn't take anything. I never take anything. 9 years. Security needs to check your cart and your person." She stopped. She had heard about this. Every housekeeper in every hotel in every city had a story like this. She had heard them, nodded, felt the secondhand cold of them, and always, somewhere in the back of her mind, run the quiet calculation that if she kept her head down and her record spotless, it wouldn't happen to her. "All right," she said. "Because what else do you say? You say all right. You say all right, and you stand there and you let them, because the alternative is confirmation. The alternative is proof of a thing they've already decided is true." Security checked the cart. They found nothing. Then they asked her to come downstairs, to the lobby. For processing, they said in front of the guests, Zariah thought, and that was when the cold feeling stopped being low grade. "The lobby?" she said. Preston didn't answer. He was already walking toward the elevator. There were later people who would say that what happened next was an overreaction. That Preston Vale was simply doing his job, following protocol, that the presence of the jewelry in Zariah's pocket had looked, from the outside, exactly like what he said it looked like. Those people had never stood in the center of the Sterling Crown lobby on a Thursday evening with 2 security officers and their hotel manager, in a uniform that made clear exactly what their role in this building was, while 200 people in cocktail dresses and business suits turned to look. Zariah stood there. She was trying to keep her breathing even, trying to hold the line between composure and collapse. She had a system for moments like this, 2 not one she had built deliberately, more one she has assembled over years from necessity. Count the exits. Find one fixed point. Keep your face from doing the thing it wanted to do. The fixed point she chose was a crack in the marble near the concierge desk, left of center. She stared at it and breathed. Preston addressed her formally, loudly, in the kind of performance that required an audience and had one. He said she had been found in the penthouse suite with access to Mrs. Whitcomb's belongings. He said a valuable item had been reported missing. He said that, in accordance with hotel policy, she was being placed on suspension pending investigation. Then he nodded to the security officer on her right. The officer reached forward and ran his hands along the outer pockets of her housekeeping apron. The kind of search that was humiliating in its casualness, the way it treated her body as a place to be checked. His hand stopped. He reached in and pulled out the necklace. The emerald necklace that Zariah had never seen before, had never held, had never wanted. It swung from the security officer's fingers under the chandelier, green and impossible, and the lobby made a sound not quite a gasp, more an exhale, the collective sound of a crowd, confirming what it had expected. Zariah stared at it. She stared at it so long that someone laughed. Not loudly. Just enough. Then Lenora Whitcomb, who had appeared from somewhere near the elevator bank, approached until she was close enough that Zariah could smell her perfume, and looked at her with an expression that wasn't anger. Anger would have been something. This was dismissal. "Did you really think," Lenora said, clear and unhurried, "that someone like you could wear something like that?" The lobby heard it. Some people looked away. Some didn't. Zariah's eyes burned. She would not cry here. She had promised herself, years ago, that she would not cry in this lobby, not in front of these people, not in this uniform. She had kept that promise through things smaller and larger than this. But this, she felt the tears coming, and there was nothing she could do about it, because the body has its own timetable, and hers had decided now, here, in the worst possible place. Preston began speaking again, formal, practiced, final. He was terminating her employment, effective immediately. 9 years, and he delivered it like a parking ticket. He told security to escort her out through the main lobby, not the service exit, the main lobby, so everyone could watch. Zariah was still staring at the crack in the marble when she heard the doors, not the regular automatic slide of hotel doors, the revolving door, its particular rhythm, and then the lobby changed. Not loudly, not dramatically. It changed the way a room changes when someone walks in who understands that the space rearranges itself around people like him and has understood that, for so long, it no longer requires his attention. She heard Preston stop mid-sentence. She looked up. Joon-Seok Kwon was standing at the edge of the lobby's entrance, rein on his shoulders, hands in his pockets, eyes on her. He was alone except for the 2 men who had stopped a few feet behind him, which was itself a kind of sentence. Zariah looked at him across that marble floor, across the crowd, across the dropped necklace, across 9 years of her life, laid out like evidence, and she said, his name the way you say the name of someone you didn't know you were waiting for. June. He didn't answer, not yet. He was already walking. The crowd moved without meaning to, just slightly. The way crowds move when a certain quantity of stillness approaches them once when. Preston turned to see who had entered. One of the security officers shifted his weight, and Joon-Seok, who had never once in 4 months raised his voice or made anything about himself when he was with her, looked at the security officer's hand on Zariah's arm and said, in a voice that filled the lobby without effort, "Take your hands off her." The room went very quiet. Preston found his voice. "Sir, this is private hotel business. If you're a guest here." Joon-Seok walked past him. He walked directly to Zariah, removed his coat in one motion, and settled it across her shoulders. It was warm from his body. She didn't say anything. She couldn't. He reached up and, with his thumb, wiped the single tear that had escaped down her left cheek, and then he looked at her, not past her, not at the crowd, not at Preston, at her. "Did you take it?" he asked. The simplest question. No preamble, no accusation wrapped in it. "No," she said. "Okay," he said. One word. And he believed her, without condition, without investigation, without the performance of due diligence that was really just another way of doubting. He believed her because he knew her, and because he was the kind of man who understood that what a person showed you over 4 months of ordinary Thursday mornings and cold coffees and questions answered, honestly was the truth of them, not this. Not a necklace someone else had put in her pocket. He turned toward Preston. Preston had made a career of reading rooms and adjusting accordingly. He was good at it. It was how he had kept his position for 11 years. He could not read this room. "Somebody in this building," Joon-Seok said, calm as anything, "is lying." Preston straightened. I'll have to ask you to. Call the police, Joon-Seok said. I want you to. I would prefer witnesses. That landed. Zariah watched it land on Preston's face, the first flash of something that looked like uncertainty. Because people who had something to hide did not invite witnesses. People who had something to hide tried to get the story settled before any more people arrived. Preston did not call the police. Not yet. Joon-Seok did not look away from him. The lobby held its breath. And Zariah, still wearing his coat, still standing in the wreckage of her 9 years, watched the man she had been slowly, carefully falling for reveal. For the first time that the stillness in him was not the stillness of a man at peace. It was the stillness of a man who was certain. There was a difference. She was only beginning to understand what it was. The lobby had not moved. That was the thing Zariah kept noticing. 200 people standing in the particular stillness of a crowd that had come to watch something and was now unsure whether what it was watching was still the same thing it had expected. The necklace was still on the marble floor. Nobody had picked it up. It was as if touching it had become complicated. Preston Vale had the look of a man recalculating. He was good at recalculating. He had been good at it his entire career, which was a career built on reading, who had power in a room and adjusting his posture accordingly. 11 years at the Sterling Crown had trained him the way a dog is trained, not by understanding but by consequence. You learned which guests required a different smile. You learned which complaints needed to disappear before they reached ownership. You learned when to push and when to back off, and how to make the backing off look like a choice you were making, rather than a choice being made for you. He was looking at Joon-Seok Kwon, trying to read him, and the reading was not going well. Sir, Preston said again, and his voice had dropped half a register from where it started, not dramatically, just enough to tell you he was adjusting. I understand you may know this employee personally, but the situation here is, the situation, Joon-Seok said, is that your security team searched a woman in the center of your lobby, in front of your guests, and found jewelry in her pocket that she says she didn't put there. The evidence is a necklace in a pocket. Joon-Seok tilted his head slightly. That's not evidence. That's a location. Preston blinked. It was a fast blink, the kind that wasn't about his eyes being dry. She was the last person in the suite, was she, not a question. Just 2 words, flat and direct, and the flatness of them made Preston stop, because the question he had phrased as a statement was not rhetorical. It was pointed. It was asking him something specific, and Preston didn't know yet what specifically it was asking, which was its own problem. Zariah was watching all of this from inside June's coat, which smelled like rain and something warmer underneath, and she was trying to track what was happening. She had known June 4 months. She had known him in cafes and on walks and in the kind of quiet evenings that don't become stories, because nothing happens in them except 2 people sitting near each other, and both feeling like that's enough. She had known him careful and kind and unhurried. She had not known him like this. This version of him occupied space differently. It wasn't aggression. There was no raised voice, no forward lean, no performance of physical size. It was more like a certain kind of weather, the kind you don't argue with. One of his men, the taller of the 2, broad-shouldered, with a stillness that matched his employer's, had moved slightly to Joon-Seok's left without being asked. The other had positioned himself near the entrance, with the casual precision of someone who had decided where he needed to be before the situation required him to decide. Zariah noticed this. She was not sure what to do with what she noticed. Lenora Whitcomb, who had retreated a few feet during the exchange, was watching Joon-Seok with the particular expression of a wealthy woman, trying to determine whether the new variable in the room represented a threat to her or merely an inconvenience. She had spent 61 years learning how to sort people quickly. She was finding this one difficult to sort. I want to see your surveillance footage, Joon-Seok said. He was speaking to Preston, but he wasn't looking at Preston anymore. He was looking at the camera, mounted near the ceiling, above the concierge desk, one of 9 visible from where he stood, all of it. Specifically, the 16th floor and the service routes between noon and 5 p.m. Preston's jaw tightened. That's proprietary hotel. Then call your legal team. Joon-Seok finally looked back at him. I'll wait. I'm not going to Preston. Preston stopped. The use of his first name was not warm. It was not personal. It was a man picking up a tool, and using it the tool of having already learned the name, of having come into this building knowing more than he appeared to know, of making clear in one word that the asymmetry Preston had assumed was actually reversed. The lobby was so quiet that Zariah could hear the fountain near the east entrance. "My name," Joon-Seok said, still without raising his voice, "is Joon-Seok Kwon. I am currently a registered guest at this hotel. I stayed in room 2204 for the past 3 days under a corporate booking, which your own front desk will confirm, which means I have as much right to be standing in this lobby as anyone else in this room." He paused. "And I would like to see your surveillance footage." Preston's jaw worked. He was looking for an angle. Zariah could see it that particular scanning's qualities of someone doing face math on options, eliminating them one by one. He was a man used to having options. He was running low. "This is highly irregular," Preston said. The phrase was the last refuge of a bureaucrat who had lost the argument but hadn't yet admitted it. "Yes," Joon-Seok agreed, "it is. They moved to the security office." "Not all of them." Preston, Joon-Seok, the tall man from Joon-Seok's left, who Joon-Seok called Dae-Hyun in a low voice at some point, and who inclined his head in response, and 2 of the hotel's security staff. Lenora Whitcomb tried to follow. Joon-Seok glanced at her once, briefly, and something in that glance communicated that she should think carefully about whether her presence in this particular room was in her interest. She stayed in the lobby. Zariah came because nobody told her to leave, and because she was done waiting in the center of the floor for other people to decide what happened to her life. The security office was a small room behind the concierge area, 3 monitors, a desk with a coffee mug that had been there long enough to leave a ring, a filing cabinet with a broken lock that someone had fixed with a piece of tape that had been there even longer than the mug. Zariah had been in this room once before, years ago, when a guest's wallet had been recovered, and she'd been asked to sign a form. She remembered thinking it was smaller than she expected for a hotel this size. It was still small. The security supervisor, a heavy-set man named Garrett, who had worked at the Sterling Crown 8 years and had the look of someone who had gradually stopped being surprised by anything, pulled up the footage from the 16th floor on the center monitor. Garrett found the timestamp. Zariah entering the suite at 10:14, working. Exiting at 10:47, nothing. Preston crossed his arms. 33 minutes inside the suite. "Standard turnover timing," Zariah said. "For a penthouse suite with, I know what I'm doing," she said. Sharper than she meant it. She didn't take it back. Dae-Hyun was leaning over Garrett's shoulder, eyes moving across the monitor grid with the focused attention of someone reading something other than what was visible on the surface. Zariah watched him without understanding what she was watching. "This is camera 24, Dae-Hyun said, his voice quiet, English clean, with a trace of an accent Zariah couldn't place. "What about it?" Garrett said. "Where is the feed?" Garrett looked at the grid. In the upper right corner of the display, one box showed static, not fully black, not a message, just the particular gray texture of a camera that was either broken or had been interrupted. The timestamp in the corner was still running. The camera was technically on. It just wasn't showing anything. "That one's been glitching," Garrett said. "Automatic." The response came too fast, Zariah thought, like it was waiting to be said. "When did it start glitching?" Dae-Hyun said. "Few days back." "Has it been logged?" Garrett shifted in his chair. "I put in a maintenance request. I'd like to see that request." Garrett looked at Preston. Preston said nothing. That silence said enough. Zariah looked at Joon-Seok. He was watching Garrett with no expression she could fully read, which she was beginning to understand was itself an expression. The absence of readable emotion in him was not blankness, it was concentration. The kind that had a direction, even if she couldn't see it yet. "Which camera is 24, Joon-Seok said. Garrett was quiet for a beat too long. "Covers the access corridor. Guest elevator to service area, 16th floor. Joon-Seok nodded slowly. "So the one camera that would show anyone other than housekeeping moving materials or personal items between the penthouse corridor and the service route. That's the one that developed a glitch. Equipment fails. Pull up the maintenance log. I'm not authorized to." Garrett. The name, same as Preston's name before it. Same tool, same quiet, same effect. "Pull up the maintenance log." Garrett pulled it up. There was no maintenance request for camera 24. The room went a different kind of quiet. Not The lobby quiet, which was the silence of spectators, but the close quiet of a small space where everyone had just understood the same thing at the same time, and some of them wished they hadn't. Preston moved first. He shifted his weight and said too quickly, "There could be a data entry error." Garrett checked the secondary. "There's no error," Dae-Hyun said. He wasn't looking at the log anymore. He was looking at the cable routing behind the monitor bank, following something with his eyes. He stood up, moved to the back wall, crouched, and looked at a junction box that was mostly hidden behind the filing cabinet. He stood back up. He looked at Joon-Seok and said one word in Korean. Zariah didn't understand the word, but she understood Joon-Seok's response to it, which was a stillness so complete it looked like a decision being made. "Somebody manually interrupted this camera," Dae-Hyun said. He said it to the room, not to anyone, specifically, in the careful tone of someone delivering a fact without editorial. The cable was disconnected from the junction and reconnected after. The timing would align with a window approximately 45 minutes before Ms. Bell entered the suite. Preston said, "That's speculative." "The dust pattern isn't speculative," Dae-Hyun said. "The cable connector has been handled recently. The junction around it hasn't. That's a physical record." Nobody spoke. Zariah could hear her own breathing. She was trying to keep it steady and mostly succeeding, but her hands inside June's coat pockets had found each other and were holding on, which was not something she had decided to do. Her body had decided for her. She had been framed. She had known it the moment the necklace hit the floor. She had known it with the certainty of a person who knows what they did and did not do, the way you know the contents of your own pockets. But knowing and having it demonstrated in front of witnesses are two different experiences, and the second one was arriving in her chest like something released under pressure. She pressed her lips together. She would not do it here, in this room, in front of Preston Vale. She would not. Preston asked them to wait in the security office while he made a phone call. He said this in the tone of a man who was still trying to sound like he was managing the situation, which he was not. He went into the corridor. Joon-Seok did not stop him. Zariah looked at him. "You know he's not calling legal." "No," Joon-Seok agreed. "Who do you think he's calling?" Joon-Seok's eyes moved to the door and back. "Someone who needs to know that a camera was cut and a copy of the recording is about to become unavailable. You think there's more footage?" "I think there's footage on the system that Garrett hasn't pulled up yet, because nobody's asked for the right timestamp." He glanced at Dae-Hyun, who was already at the monitor, fingers moving. Dae-Hyun is very good at finding the right timestamp. Zariah watched Dae-Hyun work. He moved through the surveillance archive with the particular efficiency of someone who had done this before, in contexts she probably didn't want to know about. His hands were fast and certain. "June," she said. He looked at her. "Who are you?" Not the same question she would ask him later, in front of everyone. This was a quieter version, a private version. The version that was really asking, what have I been sitting across from all these months? And why does this room feel like it recognizes you? He held her gaze for a moment. Something moved through his face, not guilt, not quite. More like the particular weight of a thing you've been carrying, that you knew you'd have to put down eventually, and the time turns out to be now. "Someone who should have told you some things earlier," he said. "That's not an answer." "I know." He looked at the monitors. "It's all I have right now. I'm sorry." She should have pushed. Later she would think she should have pushed. But there was a look in his face she had not seen from before, not the controlled stillness, not the weather quality. Something underneath those things. Something that was tired and human and apologetic in a way that was too specific to be manufactured, and she found she could not push at it. She looked away. Dae-Hyun stopped moving. On the center monitor, a timestamp read 9:31 p.m. Previous night. The suite, 1608. From a camera angled to cover the guest elevator bank, on 16 camera 18, which was not camera 24, which was not the one that had been cut. The footage was slightly washed out from the corridor lighting, the way nighttime hotel footage always was, but clear enough. A woman in a hotel robe moving quickly, opening the door to the penthouse suite, going inside. Lenora Whitcomb, at 9:31 p.m. the previous evening. "What time did she report the necklace stolen?" Joon-Seok said. 2 p.m. today, Zariah said, after I'd been on shift 5 hours. "Keep going," Joon-Seok told Dae-Hyun. Dae-Hyun scrolled forward. At 9:44 p.m., the same corridor. Lenora exiting. Moving quickly, the robe pulled tighter, going back toward the suite's main entrance. Then, at 9:52 p.m., a different figure. Not a guest, not in a robe. A man in a dark jacket, no luggage, moving along the corridor, with the practiced casualness of someone who had been here before and wanted to look like he belonged, while knowing he did not entirely. He reached 1,608, knocked in a short pattern, 2 pause, 1, and the door opened from the inside. Lenora opened it. She had gone back in. The man went in. The door closed. At 11:19 p.m., the man left. His face was visible for approximately 4 seconds in the corridor camera's angle as he turned toward the elevator. 4 seconds was enough. Zariah did not recognize him. Joon-Seok did. She could see it happen. The recognition moving through him in a way he immediately controlled, but could not entirely suppress a tension in the jaw. A very small stillness that was different from his regular stillness. The difference between a man being calm and a man choosing to be. "Who is that?" she said. Joon-Seok did not answer immediately. "June, who is that?" "Councilman Everett Shaw," he said. Quiet. Precise. City Council. He's been involved in a major redevelopment project on the South Lakefront for the past 2 years. Very public. Very well connected. He paused. There have been questions about the financing. Nobody has answered them publicly. Zariah felt the pieces moving. Slow at first, then faster. "I was inside that suite this morning. I thought I heard someone in the bedroom. The door was—" "You may have seen something," Joon-Seok said, "even without knowing what you saw. And Lenora knew you'd been in there. Knew what time you came in and when you left." He turned toward her. "The necklace wasn't about jewelry. It was about making sure nobody believed me if I remembered." Joon-Seok looked at her for a moment. That way he had, direct without being aggressive, the look of someone who was not performing attention because they were actually paying it. Yes. The room felt very small. Zariah stood there with the understanding of it settling into her, and it was not the clean, sharp feeling she might have expected. It was heavy, because this wasn't just Preston deciding she was dispensable. This was a network of people for whom she had never been a person at all, just an obstacle to be cleared. A variable to be neutralized. Someone whose 9 years of work and clean record could be dismantled in 45 minutes with a necklace and a cut cable, because who was going to fight for the plus-size black housekeeper on 16 when Lenora Whitcomb and Everett Shaw and Preston Vale were all reading from the same script? Her eyes were burning again. She had already cried once tonight. She was done. She pressed the anger down into something harder and held it there. Preston came back into the security office 4 minutes after he left. His face had changed. Not dramatically. Preston was too experienced for dramatic facial changes, but there was a quality to him now that had not been there before. A decision had been made on that phone call. Zariah could see the shape of it, even if she couldn't see the content. He looked at the monitors. At the footage that Daeun had found, which was still running on the center screen, Councilman Shaw's face in the corridor at 9:52 p.m. As clear as a man could wish it wasn't. Preston looked at it for 2 seconds. Then he looked at Garrett. "Shut it down," he said. "Archive everything from the last 72 hours to the secure server and restrict access to management authorization." Garrett reached for the keyboard. Joon-Seok said, "Daehyun." One word. Daehyun had already connected a small device, something Zariah had not noticed him produce to the monitor bank's rear port. His hands had moved while she was watching Preston's face. She had not seen him do it. She was not sure he had meant her to. "What is that?" Preston said. His voice had gone flat. "Back up," Joon-Seok said. "You can't. That footage is proprietary hotel property. You have no authorizations." The footage of a city councilman entering a private suite for an undisclosed meeting at 10 o'clock at night, followed by a guest planting evidence on an employee who happened to be scheduled into that same suite the following morning. Joon-Seok's voice stayed even. "That footage." Preston stepped forward. "I am going to have you removed from this hotel. I am going to call the police right now and have you charged with." "Call them," Joon-Seok said, for the 3rd time, and the 3rd time it sounded less like an invitation and more like a man watching a door open that had been about to close. Preston took his phone out. Zariah was watching Garrett, who was watching Daehyun, who was watching the progress indicator on the device he had connected. His face was completely neutral. The indicator reached the end. He disconnected the device. Preston dialed. Joon-se put his hand briefly on Zariah's arm, not grasping, just contact, the kind that said, "Stay here, stay with me," and then he stepped closer to Preston and said something Zariah couldn't hear, low and direct, into the space between them. Preston's hand, holding the phone to his ear, dropped slightly. He did not hang up, but his arm lowered. Whatever Joon-seok said to him, in that moment she would ask him later, and he would tell her part of it. It was not a threat in the legal sense. It contained no specific promise of harm. It was simply information, delivered at close range, by a man who had never needed to raise his voice, because he had always known more than the person he was talking to, and was only now allowing Preston to understand how much more. Preston looked at his phone. He hung up. In the silence that followed, Zariah became aware of something she had been vaguely sensing for the past several minutes, a quality of tension coming from the door, from the corridor outside, from somewhere above the small drama of this small room, a quality of too much happening too quietly. "We should go back to the lobby," Joon-seok said. To her. His hand was still on her arm. "Why?" she said. "Because the next part isn't going to stay this room." She looked at him, at the certainty in his face which she still couldn't fully read, which she was beginning to wonder if she ever would, which was a thought she didn't have time for right now, and set aside. "What did you say to him?" she asked, low enough that only he could hear. Joon-seok looked at Preston, who was standing very still near the filing cabinet, with the expression of a man watching something he built beginning to come apart. "I told him," Joon-seok said, "that the copy Dae-yoon just made is not the only copy, and that the people who now have copies are not people whose discretion can be purchased." Zariah absorbed that. "When did you? You couldn't have known any of this was—" "I didn't." He looked at her, and for a moment the weather quality dropped entirely. And he was just a man in a small room who had come in from the rain to find something worse than he expected. "I came because you were here. I found out the rest after I walked in." She didn't know what to do with that. She filed it next to the other things she didn't know what to do with and followed him back into the corridor. The lobby had reorganized itself in their absence. This was the thing about crowds. They didn't disperse. They redistributed. The guests, who had been near the entrance, had drifted toward the center. The concierge staff had gathered in a cluster near their desk. The security officers who had been with Preston were stationed at the main doors, which struck Zariah as an odd place to be stationed if the concern was internal. It struck her, and then she understood it. They were not stationed there to manage the crowd. They were stationed there to manage who could leave. Lenora Whitcomb was seated in one of the lobby chairs near the fountain, her posture precise and composed, her personal assistant standing slightly behind her. She looked like a woman waiting for a flight. She looked like a woman who had done waiting in public and understood how to make it look like a choice. She saw Zariah return. Something moved through Lenora's face very fast, controlled immediately. Not guilt. Zariah had hoped for guilt, and what she saw was calculation. A woman running numbers on the new version of the situation. Joon-seok guided Zariah toward the center of the lobby with the lightest pressure on the small of her back and stopped walking when they were visible from every corner of the room. He looked at the screens. The Sterling Crown had 4 large display screens in the lobby, 2 near the main entrance, 1 flanking the elevator bank, 1 above the concierge desk. They normally displayed rotating images of the hotel's amenities, its restaurants, the skyline of Chicago at various times of day. He looked at Dae-hyun, who had appeared from somewhere and was standing near the media panel behind the concierge desk, looking at his phone with the focus of a man reading rather than scrolling. Dae-hyun looked up. A small nod. Joon-seok turned back toward the lobby. Zariah felt the moment shift before she understood what was shifting. It was like standing near a door when someone opens it, the change in pressure before the change in air. Preston came through the corridor door behind them. He saw where Dae-hyun was standing, and his face went from controlled to something beyond controlled, the place past troll where the face starts doing things the person hasn't authorized. He said, "Stop him right now." Garrett was not moving fast enough. On every screen in the lobby of the Sterling Crown Hotel, camera 24 came back to life. Not the static, the recovered feed. Whatever Dae-hyun had retrieved from the backup, whatever had been captured in the 45 minutes before Zariah arrived. On 16 that morning, it was there now, in color, on 4 screens above a lobby full of people who had watched a woman be called a thief 2 hours ago and were now watching the same lobby's screens show them something else entirely. Lenora Whitcomb, in her robe in the corridor of the 16th floor, standing beside Zariah's unattended housekeeping cart, her hand going into the folded cloth on the second shelf, placing the necklace, withdrawing her hand, adjusting her robe, walking back. 11 seconds. The lobby made a sound Zariah had never heard a crowd make before, not gasping, not murmuring, more like the collective intake that happens before a sound, the held breath, the moment when people's mouths open, but the air hasn't decided yet what form to take. Lenora Whitcomb stood up from her chair. Her composure was extraordinary, even now. She stood with her shoulders back and her chin level, and she looked directly at the screen, and then directly at Preston. And she said in a voice that had spent 61 years learning how to be believed, "That footage has been altered." Nobody moved. Then she looked at Zariah, and the calculation in her face gave way, just at the edges, to something that was not fear exactly, but was adjacent to it, the expression of a woman who has spent a lifetime being the one who decides what the room believes, confronting for the first time a room that has decided something else. "This isn't over," Lenora said. She was speaking to Joon-Seok, though her eyes were still on Zariah. Joon-Seok said, beside her, "It isn't." And Preston, behind them both, made his last decision. He turned. He looked at the security officers near the door, his men, loyal to his salary, not to him specifically, and he said 3 words that changed the architecture of everything that came after. "Lock it down." The officers moved to the main entrance. The elevator doors opened, and 2 more appeared from the service corridor. The lobby, which had been a crowd of witnesses, became something else. It became a room with no exits. Zariah looked at Joon-Seok. He was already looking at the entrance, at the doors, at Dae-hoon, who had moved away from the media panel and was very quietly making a phone call that nobody in the room was paying attention to, because every eye was on the screens, on Lenora, on Preston, on the unraveling that was happening in real time above their heads. Joon-Seok looked down at Zariah. For the first time since he had walked through those revolving doors, something in his face was not controlled, not afraid. She would have understood afraid. What she saw was different, the look of a man who had constructed the next several moves in his mind and had now calculated that the person he most needed to protect was standing directly in the center of the board. "Stay close to me," he said. Very quiet. She had already moved closer. Preston turned from the doors toward the center of the lobby, and for a moment his eyes met hers, Zariah's eyes, and what she saw in them was not the bureaucratic contempt of a hotel manager, not the performance of a man managing a situation. It was desperation, the purest kind. The kind that does the things you never planned to do, because planning is gone, and only the animal remains. And the animal has decided that the only way out of the trap is through the person standing between it and the door. He started moving toward her. Joon-Seok stepped forward, and the point from which no one in that lobby would ever return had already arrived and passed, though not everyone had noticed yet. Preston moved fast for a man in a suit. That was the thing nobody expected. Not the guests pressed against the lobby walls, not the concierge staff frozen behind their desk, not even Zariah, who had spent 9 years watching Preston Vale perform the measured movements of institutional authority. He had always moved like a man who knew the furniture would get out of his way. Now he moved like a man who had stopped caring about the furniture. He crossed 12 feet of marble in the time it took Zariah to register that he was coming toward her. Joon-Seok was already moving. He stepped between them without drama, without the wide stance of a man preparing for a fight, just a single step, deliberate and complete, that placed his body between Preston's trajectory and Zariah's. His hand came up, not aggressive, palm forward, the gesture of a man who was offering a choice before removing it. Preston stopped. He was breathing hard. The even administrative facade had cracked along its entire length now, and what was underneath was not the contemptible bureaucrat Zariah had pegged him as for 9 years. It was something more complicated. It was something more complicated. A man who had made too many agreements with too many people and had finally reached the moment when all those agreements were calling in their debts simultaneously. "Wow. Move," Preston said. "No," Joon-Seok said, 1 syllable, completely without heat, which was somehow worse than anger. Preston's eyes cut to Zariah over Joon-Seok's shoulder. There was something in that look she didn't like, not personal hatred, which she could have understood, but the look of a man evaluating an object that had become a problem. She had been a person to Preston for 9 years, however low a person on his hierarchy. She watched herself stop being one in real time. "She needs to come with me," Preston said. There are no legal proceedings that require you to grab a woman and drag her through a lobby, Joon-Seok said. "You know that. Everyone in this room knows that." The cameras, he tilted his head slightly toward the mounted unit above the concierge desk. "Still running, still recording, definitely know that." Preston looked at the camera. His chest rose and fell. Behind him, Lenora Whitcomb had retreated toward the elevator bank. Her personal assistant, a young woman, maybe 25, who had the stunned expression of someone who had signed up to manage a wealthy woman's calendar and had found herself inside. Something else entirely, was whispering to Lenora urgently. Lenora was ignoring her. Lenora was watching the screens, where the footage of her planting the necklace was still cycling on a loop, because Dae-hyun had set it to loop and nobody had stopped him. The crowd had gone to the walls. Not fleeing they couldn't, the doors were locked, but the instinct to create distance from the center of the thing was taking them there slowly, like water, finding the edges of a container. Zariah counted the exits from where she stood. 3 visible doors, all covered by Preston's security men. The service corridor to the left of the concierge desk, which she knew from 9 years of moving through it, one door, usually unlocked, leading to the kitchen access, and then to the service elevator, and then to the street-level loading dock. She noted it and said nothing. Joon-Seok had not looked away from Preston. "Call your men off the doors," he said. "I'm not doing that. The people in this lobby have not committed any crime. You cannot legally detain them. I'm managing a security situation." "You are a hotel manager," Joon-Seok said, and the simplicity of it was its own kind of devastating. "You manage housekeeping schedules and guest complaints and table assignments for the restaurant. That is what you are. And what you have done tonight is falsely accuse an employee, attempt to destroy evidence, and now you are physically detaining over 100 people in a lobby while you figure out how to make the thing you did not happen." He paused. "Do you understand what that list looks like to a prosecutor?" Preston's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Joon-Seok waited. "Call your men off the doors," he said again, "or I will make a call that brings people to this building who will make the doors academic." The lobby held. Preston held. Then his hand went to his earpiece, the small comm he wore clipped there, which Zariah had never noticed before tonight, had never had reason to notice, and he pressed it once and said something low enough that the room couldn't hear. The security officers at the main entrance did not step aside, but they didn't advance either. It was not to surrender. It was a man buying 30 seconds to find another move. Zariah reached out and touched Joon-Seok's arm, not grabbing, just contact. He looked at her. "There's a service door," she said, barely a whisper, "left of the concierge desk, behind the pillar. It goes to the kitchen corridor." His eyes moved there and back to her in half a second. "How many on the other side?" "Usually none after 6. Kitchen closes at 5 on Thursdays." He considered this for exactly the length of time it deserved, which was not long. Then he glanced at Dae-hyun, who had materialized on Zariah's right with the quality of a man who had been moving without appearing to move. Joon-Seok looked back at Preston, who was still at the center of the lobby with the comm at his ear, the footage playing above him on 4 screens, the crowd against the walls, the whole terrible architecture of a situation he had built and could not now exit. "We're going to walk to that pillar," Joon-Seok said to Zariah, quiet and direct. "Not fast. You're going to stay at my left side, and you're going to keep your eyes forward. I know how to walk through this lobby," she said. Something close to a smile crossed his face, brief and real. "I know you do." They walked. They did not make it to the pillar. They made it to within 4 feet of it before one of Preston's security officers, not the ones at the door. A third one Zariah had not tracked, which was her mistake, for not tracking, came out of the corridor to the right and stepped into their path, with his hand up and his chest forward in the posture of a man who had been told to stop something and was going to stop it. "Nobody leaves the lobby," he said. He was addressing Joon-Seok, but his eyes kept going to Zariah in the way that eyes go to the thing you've been told is the problem. Joon-Seok stopped. Dae-hyun stepped up on the officer's left. The officer looked at him. What Dae-yoon said was very quiet, in English, which Zariah caught all of, and it was 3 sentences that were completely factual in tone and completely without any specific articulation of threat. And that combination, the factual tone, the specific accuracy of the information, the absence of emotion, made the officer's jaw tighten in a way that was not anger. It was recognition. He recognized that the man speaking to him knew things about the security company he worked for, that the security company would not want known, and that this knowledge was being offered not as leverage but as context, and that the context was, you are not the target here, and you do not need to be. The officer stepped aside. He did it without a word, without looking at Preston, and he would not make eye contact with anyone in the room for the next 40 minutes. That was a man who had just been reminded that his employer was not the only entity in this room capable of making his life complicated. They went through the service door. The kitchen corridor was exactly what Zariah had said. It was empty, fluorescent lit, smelling of industrial cleaning fluid, and the fading warmth of food service that had ended 2 hours ago. Stainless steel prep surfaces, a walk-in refrigerator on the left, the low hum of ventilation. Her territory. 9 years of this corridor, this smell, these lights. She led them through without hesitation. Dae-hyun was on his phone again. They came through the loading dock door and out onto the service alley behind the hotel, and the Chicago air hit Zariah like something she hadn't earned yet, but needed badly, cold and moving, carrying distance in it. The smells of the city, doing its ordinary thing, while the extraordinary thing happened inside the building behind her. She stopped and turned her face up for a moment. Just a moment. Joon-Seok let her have it. Then we need to move. Dae-hyun's people are 2 minutes out. Where are we going? Somewhere the footage is already waiting. She looked at him. You planned this. I planned for the possibility that Preston would try to lock down the building. I didn't know what was on the footage until Dae-hyun found it. He held her gaze. I planned because I know how men like Preston operate when they're scared. I've dealt with men like Preston before. The way he said it, the simple, experiential weight of I've dealt with men like Preston before, carried a history that she did not yet know the shape of. She was going to have to know the shape of it. She understood that now, clearly, and without the comfortable ambiguity she had been allowing herself for 4 months. We'll talk, he said, as if he heard the thought. Yes, she said, we will. A black SUV turned into the alley. The next hour moved in a way that time moved in emergencies, too fast in some places, impossibly slow in others, with no reliable connection between the two. Dae-hyun's people were 3 men, one who spoke only when necessary and drove with surgical precision through Thursday Chicago traffic, and 2 in the back who were on laptops and phones with the focused energy of people running a parallel operation that Zariah had not been briefed on. She sat between Joon-Seok and the window and watched the city go past and tried to understand what she was inside. She got pieces of it from the conversation around her. The footage Dae-hyun had copied had already been transmitted to 3 separate secure locations. Copies existed that Preston's security team could not reach, in systems that were not the Sterling Crown systems. The financial records, and there were financial records. She caught that phrase and held on to it. Financial records, which meant this went further than a necklace and a camera. And a man in a corridor had been routed through a contact Joon-Seok, referred to only as Hana, in a tone that suggested Hana was both. Formidable and currently irritated about being woken up. Everett Shaw, Zariah said, into the middle of a pause. The 2 men in the back looked at her, then at Joon-Seok. Joon-Seok said something in Korean. Brief, they went back to their screens. Shaw is the reason the camera was cut, Joon-Seok said. The meeting in the suite, whatever happened between him and Lenora the night before, it was not a social call. Shaw has been managing the financing structure for the lakefront redevelopment for 18 months. There are concerns. He paused with the word, using it the way you use a word when the thing it describes is much larger about where certain funds originated and where they went afterward. Preston is involved. Preston facilitated the meeting. He arranged the suite under a different guest name, managed the camera access, and Joon-Seok stopped. Zariah looked at him. His jaw was set. In the way of a man pushing through something he would rather not push through in front of witnesses. And he continued. He arranged for a reason to discredit you before you could remember what you saw, because you were inside that suite the following morning. You might have seen residual evidence of the meeting documents, materials, something Shaw left behind. They couldn't know for certain what you saw. They only knew they couldn't risk it. I didn't see anything, Zariah said. They didn't know that. She thought about the bedroom door. The sound she had not quite heard. The way the suite had felt occupied when it was empty. There was something in the bedroom, she said slowly. When I was cleaning. The door was almost closed. I thought I heard. She stopped. I knocked. Nobody answered. I went in and checked, because that's protocol. The room was empty, but someone had been in there recently. The linens were disturbed. I thought it was from the previous night. I straightened them. Joon-Seok was very still. What? She said. The linens? He said. He looked at Dae-Hyun, who had turned from his phone. They exchanged a look that lasted exactly 1 second and contained an entire conversation. What about the linens? Zariah said. Did you put them in the standard housekeeping bag? Yes. She stopped. The cold feeling came back, different this time. The housekeeping bags from that floor. Where do they go? Laundry processing, sub-basement. Typically within an hour of collection. She looked at the car's dash clock. 4 hours. Dae-Hyun was already on his phone. The sub-basement of the Sterling Crown Hotel was not a place guests ever went. It was not a place most staff went, outside of the laundry and maintenance teams. It existed in the architectural underbelly of the building, concrete, industrial, lit by fixtures that had been installed in the 1990s and updated reluctantly since. The laundry processing room was large enough to handle 1,200 guest rooms and ran 3 shifts. The Thursday evening shift ran until midnight. They did not go back through the front of the hotel. Dae-Hyun had to contact a maintenance man named Roy, who had worked the Sterling Crown sub-basement for 6 years and who owed a particular favor to a particular person, and who, when called, answered us in the second ring and provided a service entrance code without asking why it was needed. People in Roy's position had learned not to ask why when certain calls came. The asking had not historically served them. Roy met them in the basement corridor with his access badge and the expression of a man who was performing normalcy over significant anxiety and not quite pulling it off. He was 50, compact, with the kind of face that had spent decades in fluorescent light. The laundry from 16, Dae-Hyun said. No greeting. Already processed, Roy said. 2 loads came through from 16 this afternoon. Standard cycle, folded and returned to the collection bag before processing. Is there anything that would have been separated out? Roy frowned, not evasion confusion. Separated how? Anything that wasn't linens. Anything solid that might have ended up in a laundry bag by accident or… Dae-Hyun stopped. Zariah said, or on purpose. Roy looked at her, then at Joon-Seok, who was standing behind Dae-Hyun with his hands in his pockets, watching Roy with the patient attention of a man waiting for a machine to finish its cycle. There was one thing, Roy said. He took them to a side room adjacent to the main laundry, a small space used for sorting damaged linens, tagging items for replacement. On the sorting table, sealed in a clear evidence bag that Roy had produced from a drawer and used because he had been around the hotel long enough to know when something was the kind of thing you put in a bag, was a folded piece of paper. Cream-colored paper. High quality. The kind of paper that came on hotel letterhead or from a personal portfolio case. Zariah leaned forward. She could not read the full content through the bag without handling it, but she could see the heading at the top in a clean printed font, and she could see the signature line at the bottom. And those 2 things, the heading and the signature, were enough to change the temperature of the room. The heading was a fun name she didn't recognize. The signature was Everett Shaw's, and below the signature, in smaller print, a second signature, a counter-signature. The kind of document that required 2 people to make it official. The second signature was Preston Vale's. Zariah stood up. She said nothing for a long moment. The weight of it was not clean. This was the thing about the truth, revealing itself in pieces. Each piece was supposed to feel like progress, and some of them did, but some of them felt like finding out the building you had worked in for 9 years had rot underneath its beautiful floor the whole time, and you had been cleaning the surfaces without ever knowing. 9 years. 9 years of good work, of clean record, of kept head and quiet dignity in the face of 1,000 small contempts, and underneath all of it, underneath the marble and the chandelier and the revolving doors and the particular light that made wealthy people look like they belonged. There had been this, A document that tied a city councilman to a hotel manager, to a financial structure that Joon-Seok had called, concerning in the careful way of a man who was using the smallest possible word for a very large thing. He knew, she said. Not a question. He was part of it, Joon-Seok said. Steady. Not unkind, the whole time. 9 years. Preston knew the whole time that this hotel was... The hotel is not the operation, Joon-Seok said. The hotel is the location. The operation was between Preston, Shaw, and several other parties who used the hotel's private suites and Preston's access and discretion to conduct meetings and transfers that couldn't happen anywhere with more visibility. And Lenora. A pause. Lenora Whitcomb's Family Foundation has been a recipient of redirected funds from Shaw's redevelopment project for 3 years. She was not an innocent bystander who happened to be in the suite when a councilman visited. She was a participant. He let that land. The necklace wasn't just about silencing you. It was Lenora cleaning up her own connection to the suite, to Shaw's visit, to the document that Shaw left behind in a bedroom that a housekeeper was going to walk into the next morning. Zariah looked at the bag on the table. She thought about Lenora's face in the lobby, the contempt in it. Did you really think someone like you could wear something like that? She had thought it was the cruelty of a wealthy woman who had never considered that a person in a uniform was a person. She had been wrong. It was the cruelty of a woman who was afraid, dressed up as contempt, because contempt was less frightening than whatever was underneath. It did not make it better. It made it more precise. What do we do with this? Zariah said. She was asking practically. Her voice was steady in a way that surprised her. The anger had gone somewhere deep and settled there like ballast, and what was left on the surface was a particular kind of calm she did not entirely recognize in herself. Joon-Seok looked at Dae-Yoon. Dae-Yoon was already on the phone. They back up through the service corridor at 8:47 p.m. The lobby was different now. The lockdown quality had broken down during their absence not because Preston had relented, but because the detained guests had begun making calls of their own, and the calls had reached lawyers and journalists and one city alderman who happened to be attending an event in the hotel ballroom and who had emerged into the lobby to find it locked down and had formed strong opinions about this immediately. The main doors were open again. Preston was standing near the elevator bank, flanked by 2 of his security men on his phone. His face had the gray quality of a man who had passed through several stages of a bad night and arrived at a stage he hadn't prepared for. Lenora Whitcomb was gone. Zariah noticed this immediately. The chair by the fountain was empty. Her assistant was gone. The particular negative space of a person who had occupied a spot and departed, it was all that remained. She looked at Joon-Seok. Lenora left. His jaw tightened slightly. When? One of his men, the second one, who had been managing the lobby during their absence, approached and spoke briefly in Korean. Joon-Seok listened. His expression didn't change, but his hand, which had been loose at his side, closed. How long ago? He said in English. 20 minutes. Service elevator. Staff exit. The same exit Zariah had led them through earlier. Zariah felt the particular cold of something going wrong that you should have predicted. She had told them about the service exit. She had led them out that way, and in doing so, she had shown someone or someone watching had observed the route that was open. She used my exit, Zariah said. It's not your fault. I didn't say it was my fault. I said she used it. She turned and looked at him directly. Is she going somewhere that makes this worse for us? He met her eyes. In his face, behind the controlled stillness, she saw the honest answer moving, saw him choose. For the first time, not to edit it. She's going to Shaw, he said. Or someone connected to Shaw. Someone who will start working on making the footage inadmissible, the document questionable, and the source of all of it. He looked at her, and she understood what the end of that sentence was before he said it. Herself. The source that would be made questionable was her. The woman who was already publicly framed as a thief, who had been walked through the lobby in front of 200 witnesses, whose credibility had already been put through the public shredder. If they moved fast enough, if Lenora reached the right people fast enough, the story of tonight could be rewritten as a disgruntled terminated employee, a foreign businessman with unclear business interests, a conspiracy theory constructed by people with reasons to construct it. It would not hold. Not with the footage, not with the document, not with copies already transmitted to locations outside the hotel's control. But it would take time to not hold, and in the time it didn't hold, a great deal could happen. Zariah understood this with a completeness that surprised her. She had spent 9 years in rooms full of wealthy people conducting the business of the world over fine linen and expensive coffee, and she had paid attention, which was something people who ignored her had never understood about being ignored. It left you free to pay attention. She turned to Joon-Seok. "The document from the laundry," she said. "Roy has it. Daehyun's people photographed it and transmitted it with the footage. Can it reach someone before Lenora reaches Shaw?" Joon-Seok was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, something that was evaluation and something else, something warmer underneath. The look of a man watching someone he respects do the thing he respects them for. "It already has," he said. "Then why does your face look like that?" He inhaled, controlled, deliberate. The breath of a man about to say a thing he has held for a long time. "Because the person who already has the footage and the document," he said slowly, "is a federal investigator. And the reason she already has it, the reason Dae-Yun had her contact information and used it without being asked, is because she has been building a case against Everett Shaw for 14 months. Zariah waited. "And the reason we have her contact information," Joon-Seok continued, the careful quality of his voice increasing in the way of a man walking across ice, "is because she has been building a secondary case alongside the Shaw investigation. A case that intersects with certain business operations." He stopped. "My business operations." The lobby noise around them became background. Zariah heard it, but it was far away. "She's been investigating you," she said. "Yes." "For how long?" 14 months. "The same 14 months. And you knew?" "Yes." She looked at him. At the man who had handed her a coffee in a cafe 4 months ago on a cold morning. At the man who had brought her coffee after long shifts, who had asked her questions and listened to the answers, who had removed his coat in the center of a hostile lobby and placed it across her shoulders and asked her one question and believed the answer. She looked at him and tried to decide what was true. "Did you know who I was?" she said. Her voice came out quieter than she expected. "Before the cafe. Did you know I worked at this hotel?" The pause was not long, but it existed. "I knew you worked here," he said. The cold that moved through Zariah Bell in that moment was not rage. It was more foundational than rage. It was the cold of a floor, giving way the structural cold, the kind that made you look at everything above it differently. "Why," she said, one word. "Flat. Final." He did not look away from her. Whatever he was, she had established that he did not look away. "Because Shaw's operation runs through this hotel, and I needed to know how it ran." And he stopped. He started again. "You were not a target. You were not a source. You were a woman in a cafe who I handed a coffee to because it was cold outside. And what happened afterward?" His voice did something she had not heard it do before. A faint roughness that was not performed. "What happened afterward was not part of any plan I had." "But you knew, yes. And you didn't tell me." "No." She looked at the marble floor. She looked at the crack near the concierge desk. Her fixed point, the one she had chosen when the necklace hit the floor. And her world came apart the first time. It looked very far away from where she was standing. Preston was moving again. She caught it in her peripheral vision. He had gotten off his phone, and the gray quality of his face had shifted into something more decided, and he was moving toward the service corridor, with his remaining security man, with the purposeful strides of a man who had found his last option. She looked at Joon-Seok, and she made the only decision left to make, not because she had forgiven him. Not because the thing he had told her didn't matter. Not because the ground under her had stabilized. She made it because Preston was moving toward the room where Roy was standing with a document that could end this, and the man beside her was the only person in this building who had the capability to stop him. And what happened to her feelings was secondary to what happened to the truth. "Preston's going to the sub-basement," she said. Joon-Seok turned. Preston had reached the service corridor door, and Joon-Seok Kwon, who had spent 4 months letting her see exactly as much of himself as she needed to see, looked at the door, looked at her, and for the first time all night made a decision that was not controlled, not calculated, not the move of a man managing a situation. He ran. Joon-Seok ran. Zariah ran with him. She didn't decide to her body decided. The same way her body had decided to cry in the lobby when she told it not to. The same way it had decided to move closer to him when Preston started across the floor. Her legs were moving before her mind caught up, and she was through the service corridor, door, 2 steps behind Joon-Seok, and 1 step ahead of Dae-yoon, who had appeared from somewhere with the reliability of a man who had made a career out of being where he needed to be before being asked. The service corridor was different running through it. The fluorescent lights strobed slightly at the far end, a flicker she had never noticed walking, visible now, because everything was visible when your heart was doing what hers was doing. Her shoes on the concrete were loud. Too loud. Preston would hear them, would know someone was coming behind him, would have time too. She heard a door ahead. Metal on metal. The particular sound of the sub-basement stairwell door, which had a heavier latch than the others, because maintenance had replaced the frame 2 years ago after a delivery cart bent the original. She knew that sound, the way she knew every sound in this building. "He's taking the stairs," she said, breathing hard. Sub-basement, 2 flights. Joon-Seok didn't slow down. Shortcut. The freight elevator. 30 feet back. He stopped so fast she nearly ran into him. Turned. Looked at her. "Show me." They reversed direction, and Zariah moved to the front past a linen cart and a utility shelf, and the corner where the corridor bent left, and there it was, the freight elevator, wide enough for a full laundry pallet, operated by a key card that she still had because nobody had thought to take her access card when they fired her in the lobby 2 hours ago. She pulled it from the pocket of June's coat, which she was still wearing. The elevator took 12 seconds to arrive. She counted every one of them. They went down. The sub-basement was colder than the floors above it. Always the building's climate control didn't reach evenly this far down, and the concrete held whatever temperature the ground decided to be, which in November Chicago was a specific and unkind cold. The laundry room hummed with the sound of machines that kept running on their cycle, regardless of what was happening on the floors above. Roy was where they had left him, standing near the sorting table, with the expression of a man who had been waiting anxiously and was now watching the anxious thing materialize in person. He was not alone. Preston's security man, the one who had accompanied him through the lobby, a man named Kessler that Zariah recognized from 3 years of corridor crossings without ever having learned. His name was standing between Roy and the sorting table, with his hand on Roy's shoulder and the document bag in his other hand. Preston was 4 feet away. He turned when the freight elevator doors opened. For 1 second, a genuine second, measured and real, nobody moved. The tableau held Preston and Kessler on one side of the room, the document between them, Zariah and Joon-Seok and Dae-yoon, stepping out of the elevator on the other. Roy in the middle, looking at the floor with the expression of a man who had made a calculation and was not sure it was the right one. Then Preston said, "Take it and go," to Kessler, and things stopped being still. Kessler moved toward the door on the right side of the room, the loading dock access, which was the other exit, and Dae-yoon moved to intercept him, and the space between them collapsed fast. Zariah had time to register that Dae-yoon was not a large man, not the way Kessler was large, but that this appeared to matter to Dae-yoon, approximately not at all. And then the space between them was gone, and her attention was pulled away because Preston was moving toward her, not Joon-Seok. Her. She understood the logic of it, even as she understood. She had very little time to act on the understanding. She was the weakest piece on the board, in Preston's calculation the one, without backup, without training, without the capacity for violence that the other pieces carried. If he could get to her, he could use her. Not as a hostage in any dramatic sense, but as leverage as the person whose safety could be used to pause the other side long enough for Kessler to clear the room with the document. She had spent 9 years being the easiest piece to move. She stepped left toward the linen sorting shelves and picked up the one thing within reach that had weight to it, a commercial laundry press arm that had been removed from one of the machines for maintenance, leaning against the shelving unit, steel and heavy. She picked it up in both hands and turned to face him. Preston stopped. He looked at the press arm, at her hands around it, at her face. She looked back at him without moving and said, "I have worked in this building for 9 years. I know every room, every corridor, every exit. I helped 3 different people escape through the loading dock Just tonight. Her voice was steadier than she had any right to. You are not going to move me. Preston's face did something complicated. It was not fear, he was past fear in the clean sense. It was the recalibration of a man encountering an obstacle where he had calculated clear ground. Zariah. He said her name like it meant something, like they had a history that required it. You don't understand what you've walked into. These people. He gestured toward Joon-Seok, who had positioned himself 6 feet to Zariah's right, and had not moved toward Preston, was simply there watching you think they're helping you. You think this man came into this lobby because he cares about you. I know exactly why he came into this lobby, she said. Do you? He took a step. She didn't move. He stopped. Do you know what Joon-Seok Kwon is? What his people do? You're standing next to a criminal organization using you as... I'm standing next to a man who believed me when no one else did, she said. We can have a complicated conversation about the rest later. Right now you need to step back. Preston looked at the press arm. He looked at her. He looked at Joon-Seok. And what passed between the two men in that look was something she felt, but couldn't fully read an acknowledgement, almost. The acknowledgement of two very different men who had both looked at the same woman and reached completely different conclusions about what she was. Then the sound from the other side of the room changed. Kessler was bigger than Dae-hun. He had 4 inches and maybe 60 pounds on him, and in the first 20 seconds of whatever was happening near the loading dock door, it was clear that he was using all of it. The sound was not a movie fight, not the clean impacts and choreographed stumbles of something staged. It was the ugly, effortful sound of two bodies in an actual dispute over space, grunts and the scrape of shoes on concrete, and the thud of a shoulder hitting a shelving unit hard enough to shift it. The document bag was on the floor. Zariah saw it happen the moment Kessler's grip loosened as Dae-yoon drove him back against the shelving, and the bag slid down and hit the concrete. Preston saw it too. He made the decision she had known he was going to make, the animal decision, the one past strategy, and lunged for the bag. He cleared her. He was fast, and he was desperate, and those two things together made him faster than she expected. And he got 2 steps past her before Joon-Seok moved, not running. 1 long step, and a pivot that put his body in Preston's path. And then he did something that was not violent in the theatrical sense. He used Preston's own momentum, caught his arm at the elbow and the shoulder with both hands and redirected, the way water redirects around a stone. And Preston went sideways into the sorting table with a sound that was all impact, no theater. Preston hit the table, knocked the edge, grabbed it to stay upright. He was breathing in the way of a man past his physical reserves loud, through his mouth, the breath of someone whose body had been running on adrenaline and has now been informed the adrenaline account is overdrawn. He looked at the bag on the floor, 6 feet away. He looked at Joon-Seok between him and it. It's over, Joon-Seok said. Preston laughed. It was not a happy sound. You have no idea what you've started. I know what you started. 14 months ago when you gave Shaw access to this building's private suites for meetings that were never logged. I know the fund name on that document. I know the 3 offshore accounts the transfers ran through. I know the name of Shaw's contact at the zoning board who approved the variance that made the redevelopment profitable enough to be worth all of this. He paused. I know because knowing things about people like Shaw is what keeps people like me alive. And I've known all of it for months. The room was very quiet except for the laundry machines and Kessler's breathing, which had changed character since Dae-yoon had gotten a hold of his wrist in a specific way that had made Kessler stop moving. Roy was still standing near the wall. His face had resolved into something simpler than anxiety, the face of a man watching a tide come in, who has decided to stop fighting the water. Preston looked at Zariah. All of this, he said, for a housekeeper. She felt the word, the way you felt a word that was meant to diminish you, and she felt it travel through her without landing. The way words eventually stopped landing when you had heard variations of them, for long enough that your body had built scar tissue at the impact site. 9 years of a housekeeper, she said. Yeah. Joon-Seok picked up the document bag. They brought Preston upstairs at 9:22 p.m., not through the service corridor, through the main lobby, Joon-Seok's choice, which Zariah understood when they reached it. The lobby was still populated. The guests who had been detained earlier had not all left. Some had stayed because the story was still happening, and humans were drawn to stories, even uncomfortable ones. The concierge staff was still at their posts. The screens were still running the footage from camera 24 on a loop, though someone had turned the volume on the lobby ambient music down, which meant the visual was all that was left. They walked through the center of it. Preston between two of Joon-Seok's men, Sim Joon-sin, walking with the deliberate propriety of a man who had decided that whatever happened next, it would not happen with him being dragged. Zariah on Joon-Seok's left, Dae-hyun behind them. Roy, who had come along because Dae-hyun had asked him to, and Roy had the sense to understand the asking was not optional, to the rear. The lobby looked at them. Then the doors opened from outside. 3 people came in, a woman in a dark suit who moved with the direction of someone who knew exactly where she was going and was going there now, a man in a jacket with a federal badge visible at his belt, and a third person who was on a phone and stayed near the door. The woman looked at Joon-Seok. He looked at her. Something passed between them, not warm, not hostile. The look of 2 people who had been circling each other's information for 14 months and had arrived through entirely different routes at the same room on the same night. Kwon, she said. Agent Reyes, he said. Zariah looked at him. He didn't look at her yet. He was watching Agent Reyes walk toward them with the particular focus of a man who had prepared for this specific moment and was now discovering that preparation and arrival were 2 completely different experiences. Reyes stopped in front of Preston. She looked at him with the expression of someone who had spent a long time building toward a moment and was now inside it and was finding it exactly as complicated as she had expected. Preston Vale. I have a federal warrant for your arrest in connection with financial fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit evidence tampering. She looked at the document bag in Joon-Seok's hand. Is that what I think it is? It was recovered from a laundry bag in the sub-basement, Joon-Seok said. The chain of custody is documented. By whom? Dae-hyun Ryu, myself, a maintenance employee named Roy Carver, and he glanced at Zariah Bell, who found the document's original location and directed recovery. Reyes looked at Zariah. Zariah looked back. Ms. Bell, Reyes said. Something in her voice shifted slightly. Not softer exactly, but more direct. The directness of one competent person acknowledging another. Thank you for your help tonight. I wasn't helping you, Zariah said. I was helping myself. Reyes held her gaze for a moment. Then the corner of her mouth moved in something that wasn't quite a smile, but was in that direction. Fair enough. She took the document bag and handed it to her colleague. She looked at her second agent and said 2 words Shaw too, and he was already on his phone. Preston was taken to the door. He did not look at Zariah as he passed. She noticed that. She thought about whether she wanted him to look at her, wanted the acknowledgement, the accounting, and found that she didn't. She had stopped needing things from Preston Vale. It had happened somewhere in the sub-basement over a piece of paper and a steel press arm, and she had not noticed the precise moment of its happening, but it was done. He walked through the door. The crowd in the lobby watched him go. The lobby began to breathe again after that. Not immediately, there was the time that followed an event, when the event was still present in the air, still occupying the emotional square footage of the room. But gradually, the concierge staff began speaking to each other. 2 guests left through the main entrance, talking quietly. The screen cycled on. Zariah sat down. There was a bench near the fountain, one of those decorative lobby benches that nobody actually sat on because it was positioned to look at rather than use. She sat on it. She put her elbows on her knees and her face in her hands, and she breathed for approximately 60 seconds in the complete privacy of her own covered face, which was not enough but was what she had. Then she took her hands away. Joon-Seok was sitting on the bench beside her. She had not heard him sit down. She suspected he had been there for some of the 60 seconds and had simply waited. They sat there for a moment without speaking. The fountain made its sound. Somewhere behind them, Dae-hyun was talking to Agent Reyes in the careful tone of a man who had navigated federal interactions before and knew the precise geometry of how much to offer and how much to withhold. Roy had been located by one of the federal agents and was being spoken to gently near the service corridor door. The second agent was on the phone, still. Lenora, Zariah said. Already in federal custody, Joon-Seok said. Reyes had a second team at the hotel's service entrance. She arrived 10 minutes before she came through the front. Zariah absorbed that. She planned for Lenora to run. She planned for the possibility. That's different. He paused. Reyes is very good. Is she going to arrest you? The question came out direct and level, and she had not planned it, but she did not regret it. He looked at the fountain. His hands were resting on his knees, relaxed, in the surface way of a man whose hands had been trained to appear relaxed. She could see the tension in his forearms. Not tonight, he said. But there are ongoing matters, he said it carefully. There are decisions I need to make. That I should have. He stopped, started differently. Rayans came tonight for Shaw and for Preston. Not for me. But what I know about Shaw's operation and what my organization knows is going to be relevant to a federal case. And that relevance has costs. What kind of costs? He looked at her. She held it. She was tired, the kind of tired that lived in your bones and your eyes and the specific muscles along your shoulders that had been carrying the weight of the last 4 hours. And she was angry, still, the anger that had settled like ballast and not moved. And she was looking at a man who had told her the truth when it mattered, and had not told her other truths when it had also mattered. And she was trying to locate the precise calculation of what that meant. There are things I need to dismantle, he said, carefully, correctly, with cooperation that has to be negotiated and not assumed. You're talking about your organization. Yes, the criminal organization. He did not flinch from the word. Yes. She looked at the marble floor, at the crack near the concierge desk. Her crack, her fixed point that she picked in the worst moment of the night because she needed something that wasn't moving. Why did you come tonight? She said. Not thank you. Not I'm glad you did. The question underneath those responses, the one she actually needed answered. You could have sent someone. You could have, because you were here. That's not an answer that, Zariah. He said her name the way you said a name when you needed the person to hear it as just their name, stripped of context and history and complication. I came because you were here, and because the moment I understood what was happening in this lobby, I understood what kind of moment it was. I have managed situations. I have sent people on my behalf into situations where management was required. This was not a situation I was going to manage from a distance. He paused. That should tell you something. I am aware that it also raises other questions. I am not asking you to resolve those questions tonight. She was quiet. The lobby moved around them. Then Reyes was back, standing in front of the bench, looking at both of them with the appraisal of a woman who had gotten very good at reading the temperature of a room. Ms. Bell, she said, I'm going to need a full statement. Tonight if possible. Fine. Reyes looked at Joon-Seok. Something moved across her face, not hostility, not the opposite. The careful neutrality of a professional transaction that both parties understood was also something else. Mr. Kwon, we're going to need to have a conversation. I know, he said. My office, Monday morning. Bring your attorney. I'll be there. Reyes looked at him for a more second. Then, the footage from tonight. All of it. Your people transmitted copies to locations I haven't fully identified yet. You'll have access to everything you need. That wasn't a question. I know, he said again. She looked at Zariah one more time. You did well tonight, Ms. Bell, under circumstances that would have broken most people. Zariah looked up at her. Circumstances that were designed to break me. Yes. Reyes said it without flinching. They were. And they didn't. She moved away, back toward her agents, back toward the work that didn't stop because the dramatic part was over. Zariah sat with that for a moment. They didn't. No, they hadn't. She was sitting on a lobby bench in a hotel that had fired her 3 hours ago, wearing a man's coat with her card in her pocket and the document in federal custody, and Lenora Whitcomb in federal custody, and Preston Vale in federal custody, and she was tired and angry and uncertain about more things than she had been uncertain about at the start of the day. But she was upright. She thought about her mother, who was at home on West Garfield with the gospel program on low, who did not know what had happened tonight, who would not know until Zariah walked through the door and sat down at the kitchen table and figured out how to explain it. Delphine Bell, who had taught her daughter that dignity was not something other people gave you, who had said it exactly once during the worst month after Zariah's father died, sitting at that same kitchen table. The only thing nobody can take is the way you carry yourself. So carry yourself right. She had carried herself right tonight, through the lobby and the security office and the sub-basement, and back up through the main entrance with federal agents and a man whose full truth she still didn't know. And she had carried herself right the whole way. She sat up straight on the decorative bench that nobody was supposed to actually sit on. Joon-Seok was watching her. You're thinking about your mother, he said. She looked at him sideways. How do you know that? You get a specific expression. He said it simply. No performance in it. I've noticed it before. She thought about saying, you've noticed a lot of things. She thought about saying, how many of the things you noticed were about Shaw, and how many were about me. She thought about all the versions of the next conversation they needed to have, which would be long and would not be easy, and would require her to sit across from him with the knowledge of what she now knew, and decide what she was going to do with it. She didn't say any of those things. She said, I need to call her. Of course. He stood, giving her the bench and the space, and the privacy of the gesture itself. She pulled out her phone. Low battery, 11%. 9 years of remembering to bring her charger to work, and tonight was the night she hadn't. She called her mother. It rang twice. Baby, Delphine said. The word that was not a word but a sound, the specific sound her mother made, that meant, I know something happened, and I've been sitting here knowing it. Zariah pressed her lips together. Hey, Mama? You sound like the inside of a long day. Yeah, her voice caught slightly. She let it. I'm okay. I'll tell you everything when I get home. She stopped. I just wanted to hear your voice. A pause. Then Delphine, quiet and certain. Come home. I will. She hung up. Joon-Seok was standing a few feet away, looking at the entrance. His profile against the lobby lights the charcoal suit that had been expensive before the evening and showed the evidence of it now. The rain long dried on his shoulders. The particular tension he carried in his jaw that she had come to recognize as his version of exhausted. 2 of his men were near the entrance. Dae-yoon had reappeared from wherever Dae-yoon went between appearances. The screens above the lobby were still running. Not the camera footage anymore. Someone Dae-yoon, she assumed, had changed the feed. The screens now showed a static image, the Sterling Crown Hotel logo, and beneath it, in clean corporate font, a guest services message that would mean nothing to anyone who hadn't spent 9 years inside this building. It meant something to her. She stood up. She walked to where Joon-Seok was standing, and she stopped beside him. And she looked at the lobby, the marble and the chandelier, and the particular light that she had spent 9 years knowing. And she felt something shift in her that was not forgiveness, and was not resolution, and was not the clean end of anything. It was the shift of a person who has survived the worst hour, and is now standing in the first minute of whatever came after it. I need an answer, she said, not turning toward him. Still looking at the lobby. Not tonight, but I need an answer. He didn't ask which question. He knew which question. You'll have it, he said. Across the lobby, Agent Reyes was speaking to someone on her phone with the intent expression of a woman receiving information that was changing the shape of something she had been building for 14 months. Her colleague had returned and was showing her something on a tablet, and Reyes was looking at it with the focused attention of someone who had just found a piece she had been missing and was now placing it in the architecture of everything else. She looked up. She looked at Joon-Seok. He looked back. She turned the tablet around so he could see it from across the lobby. It took Zariah 2 seconds to understand what she was looking at. A photograph taken from security footage in a different location, not the Sterling Crown, somewhere else. Somewhere with different lighting and a different camera angle. A man in a corridor. A meeting. An exchange of something that the camera had caught from enough of an angle to be identifiable. The man receiving the exchange was not Shaw, was not Preston, was not anyone connected to the hotel. He was a man Zariah had never seen before. But Joon-Seok had seen him before. She knew, because of what happened to his faces when he looked at the tablet across the lobby, the thing that was not controlled, the thing that moved through him and could not be edited before she saw it, the thing that was past surprise and into something more specific, recognition. And beneath the recognition, something she had no name for yet, but that tightened every line of him and made the controlled stillness collapse entirely for the space of exactly 3 seconds before he rebuilt it. 3 seconds was enough. Who is that? She said. Very quiet. Joon-Seok did not answer. He was already walking toward Agent Arias, with the stride of a man who has just discovered that the situation he thought he understood was substantially larger than he understood it, and that the size of it had just become personal in a way that changed the calculation of everything he had been prepared to do. Zariah followed, because that was what you did when the ground shifted under you. Again you moved with it, or you fell. She moved. Reyes held the tablet out as they reached her, and Zariah looked at the screen at close range now, and the man in the photograph was still a stranger to her. And Joon-Seok was standing beside her, with the rebuilt stillness that she now knew was the controlled version of something else. And Reyes was looking at him with the expression of a woman who had just played the card she had been holding for 14 months. "You know him," Reyes said. It was not a question. Joon-Seok looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then he said a name, and the name, which Zariah did not recognize, landed on Dae-Yoon like a physical impact. She watched it happen. Watched Dae-Yoon's face go from neutral to something behind neutral. Something that a person showed when they received information that restructured the last several years of their life in a single second. And Zariah understood in the specific way you understood things when you had spent a night learning to read the people around you under pressure, that the man in the photograph was not an unknown party in Shaw's financial network. He was someone from inside Joon-Seok's, and he had been in the Sterling Crown Hotel the night before Zariah was framed. Not as a guest, not as a stranger, as someone who had known exactly which camera to cut and exactly which housekeeper would be assigned to the penthouse suite the following morning, and exactly how to make sure that the woman Joon-Seok Kwon had been quietly, carefully falling for would be destroyed in public before Joon-Seok could reach her. The betrayal was not Preston's. It was not Lenora's. It was not Shaw's. It was already inside the building Joon-Seok had built, and it had been there long enough to know him, well enough to aim at the one thing that would bring him into the open. Her. Zariah stood in the center of the Sterling Crown lobby and felt the truth of it settle through her like water, finding its level, cold and complete, and looked at the man beside her, the man she had not yet decided what to do with. The man who had run through a service corridor for the first time in 4 months without calculation, and watched him look at the photograph of the person who had used her to get to him. His jaw was tight, his hands at his sides were still, and his eyes, when he finally looked away from the tablet and looked at her, held something she had not seen in them before tonight. Through all the controlled weather and the careful stillness and the measured truth of him, they held something that was going to require a decision. Not about Shaw, not about Preston, not about the federal case that was now going to be substantially more complicated than anyone in this lobby had understood 20 minutes ago. About who he was willing to be and what he was willing to do, and whether the man who had run through a basement corridor and placed his coat across her shoulders in a hostile lobby was the man who kind of was going to remain when all of this was finished. That was the question on his face, and it was looking at her. And she had not yet decided whether she was the right person to answer it. The name Joon-Seok had said was Min Jae-seo. Zariah did not know that name. She filed it the way she had been filing things all night, not fully, not with the bandwidth that an understanding required, but with enough precision to retrieve it later when the bandwidth returned. Min Jae-seo. The way it landed on Dae-Yoon's face. The way it restructured the last several hours into a different shape. Reyes was watching Joon-Seok the way a chess player watched the board after an unexpected move, not with surprise, exactly, because surprise implied she hadn't considered the possibility, and Reyes had clearly considered most possibilities. More with the focused attention of a woman, recalculating the order in which things needed to happen. "How close?" Reyes said. Joon-Seok looked at the tablet one more time. Close enough to know this building's security layout. Close enough to know her schedule. He did not look at Zariah when he said her. He looked at the photograph. Close enough to know that bringing me into the open here was worth the exposure. Is he still in Chicago? If he's in Chicago, he's already leaving it. Reyes looked at her second agent. A nod passed between them, the compressed communication of people who had worked together, long enough that full sentences were inefficient. The agent moved away with his phone. Dae-Hyun said something in Korean, low, directed at Joon-Seok, with an edge in it that Zariah had not heard from him before. Whatever was underneath the professional neutrality of the man, whatever lived there when the situation stripped the neutrality away, it was in his voice now, not panic, something older than panic. The sound of a man who had believed a perimeter was secure and had just learned it had been open the whole time. Joon-Seok answered him. Brief. Firm. The answer of a man who had already made a decision about how to proceed and was communicating it, not discussing it. Dae-Hyun's jaw tightened. He did not argue. He pulled out his phone and walked away and began making calls. And the quality of those calls, the pace, the tone told Zariah, without understanding the language, that what Joon-Seok had instructed him to do was the beginning of something significant being shut down. She looked at Joon-Seok. "Who is he?" she said. "In your organization." "Was," Joon-Seok said. "Who was he?" He looked at the entrance of the Sterling Crown, past the revolving doors, past the Chicago night beyond them. He looked at it the way you looked at something you had built that you were now seeing from the outside for the first time. And the outside view was different from what you had believed when you were inside it. "My second," he said. "For 6 years." Zariah let that number sit. 6 years of proximity, of trust compounded into infrastructure, of access so complete it would have been invisible, the access of someone who knew where you were going to be, because they helped determine where you were going to be. "He knew about me," she said. "It wasn't a question. Before the cafe. He's the reason you knew I worked here." Joon-Seok turned to look at her, and in his face, she saw the thing she had been watching for, since he told her the truth. In the car, the line between what he had done and why he had done it, which was not a line that excused the doing, but was a line that existed, and that he was not going to pretend didn't. He flagged this hotel as a location connected to Shaw's operation. He gave me a list of employees who had consistent access to the relevant floors. Your name was on it. He held her gaze. "I went to the cafe because it was close to the hotel, and I wanted to understand the pattern of the place. You were there, and what happened after that was not Min Jae's plan. No, but it served it." She said it evenly, without accusation in the tone, because the tone wasn't where she was keeping the weight of it. "You got close to me, and he watched you get close, and he understood what that meant, and he used it." Joon-Seok was silent. "He used me to bring you here," she said, "into a public situation, into a building with federal surveillance, into exactly the kind of exposure that someone trying to dismantle your operation from inside it would need." Yes, the word cost him something. She could see what it cost, not guilt, in the clean confessional sense, but the specific payment of a man who understood that the intelligence and precision he had applied to every other aspect of his life had failed completely in the area that had turned out to matter most. He had been careful about everything, and reckless about the one thing, and the recklessness had a shape now. It looked like her face. She looked away from him. She looked at the lobby, the crowd that had thinned but not emptied, the federal agents moving through it with the purposeful quiet of people who had a great deal of work still to do, the concierge staff who had returned to their posts because the world required them to, even when the world had just demonstrated its capacity for spectacular misbehavior. She looked at the screens, where the hotel's logo had replaced the footage, where the Sterling Crown presented its best face to a lobby that had spent the last several hours looking at its worst one. She had worked in this building for 9 years. She had cleaned the suite where Shaw and Lenora had made their arrangement. She had changed the linens that held a document that tied a city councilman to a financial network that had been laundering the futures of people in neighborhoods like hers. Neighborhoods that were being redeveloped, which was a word that meant someone had decided the people currently living there were worth less than the real estate under their feet. She had cleaned that room and gone about her day and been chosen as the instrument of someone else's erasure because she was convenient, because she was the housekeeper, because a woman in a uniform with 9 years of quiet service was the perfect surface to write a lie on. She thought about the women on West Garfield who had lost their buildings in the first wave of the redevelopment. She thought about Marvine, who had 3 years more than her at the Sterling Crown, and whose neighborhood had changed so fast she barely recognized it. She thought about her mother, who had spent her whole life in a city that kept deciding her address was worth more than her presence in it. The weight of it was not clean, and it was not simple, and it did not resolve into a single feeling. She stood in it. Reyes came back at 10:08 p.m. She had the look of a woman who had been working for a long time, and had several more hours of work ahead of her, and had made her peace with this as the nature of the thing. "Min Jae Seo," she said to both of them. "We have a photograph and a name. We have the security footage, placing him in this building last night. We have evidence connecting him to the camera interruption on 16. She paused. "And we have a federal warrant being processed as of 11 minutes ago." Joon-Seok nodded once. "He's connected to your organization," Reyes said, not delicately, That connection is going to be part of the record. I know. Which means Monday's conversation is going to be more complex than I initially outlined. I know that too. Reyes looked at him steadily. I'm going to tell you something that I am not required to tell you, and that my supervisor would advise against telling you. Not because I trust you, Kwon. Because I've been doing this long enough to know when the math only works one way. He waited. The federal case against Shaw has been built on 14 months of financial forensics. What your people transmitted tonight, the footage, the document, the chain of custody, fills a gap in that case that we could not have filled any other way. Without it, Shaw's attorneys would have argued procedural contamination and bought him another 2 years of litigation. She paused. With it, we have a clean line from Shaw to the hotel, to the funds, to the accounts. That line has your fingerprints on it, and the prosecutor is going to have to decide what to do with that. What will she decide? Joon-Seok said. I don't know. Reyes said it without flinching. But I know that cooperation has a value that obstruction does not. And I know that the man who handed me a complete evidentiary package and the man who built a criminal organization are sitting in the same body, and that is going to require some navigation. She looked at Zariah. Ms. Bell, your statement can be taken tonight or tomorrow morning. Your choice tonight, Zariah said. I want it done. Reyes nodded. She looked at both of them one more time, the look of a woman finishing a chapter she had been writing for over a year, and then she went back to work. Zariah gave her statement in one of the hotel's small conference rooms off the lobby, sitting across from a junior federal agent named Torres, who had the careful note-taking energy of someone who understood that accuracy mattered more than speed. She talked for 40 minutes. She did not omit anything. She talked about the suite and the timestamps. She talked about the bedroom door and the sound she had not quite heard. She talked about the necklace and the lobby and Preston's face when he told her the search had found something. She talked about the sub-basement and the press arm in her hands and the feeling of standing her ground in a room where she was supposed to be the person who had no ground to stand. She talked about Joon-Seok. Not everything, but the parts that were relevant to the legal record, the cafe, the months, the fact of their relationship, his presence in the lobby, and what he had done when he got there. She said it plainly, without editing it into something simpler than it was, because she had spent the last several hours watching what happened when the truth got edited by people who needed it to be something else, and she was done with editing. Torres wrote everything down with the focused concentration of someone who knew he was recording that was going to be read by people, with considerably more authority than him. And when it was done, he read it back to her for corrections, and she made 2 small ones and signed it. She was out of the conference room at 10:59 p.m. Joon-Seok was in the corridor. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and his eyes on the floor, and he looked, for the first time since he had walked through the revolving doors, like a man who was tired. Not performing tiredness, actually tired. The specific exhaustion of a person who has operated at maximum capacity for hours and has now reached the moment when the capacity starts to show its edges. He looked up when she came out. She stopped in front of him. They looked at each other for a moment in the quiet corridor, away from the lobby and the agents and the screens and the crowd, and the quiet was different from any quiet they had shared before, heavier, more complicated, loaded with the particular weight of things that had been said and things that hadn't. My statement is done, she said. How are you? That's a complicated question. I know, he didn't simplify it. She appreciated that. Are you all right enough to have a conversation? She considered. Her body was exhausted in the specific way of sustained adrenaline wearing off, slightly shaky behind the knees, a low persistent ache in her shoulders, eyes that felt the particular dryness of hours of vigilance. Her mind was running at about 60% of its usual sharpness, which was still sharper than most situations required. Yes, she said. He straightened from the wall. Not here. They found a small seating area on the lobby's east side, partially obscured by a structural column, where 2 chairs faced each other over a low table, and the ambient noise of the lobby created enough cover that a private conversation stayed private. Daehyun was visible near the entrance, not close enough to hear, close enough to be where he needed to be. The federal presence in the lobby had consolidated near the concierge desk, processing the evening's paperwork with the organized efficiency of people who had done this before in other lobbies on other nights. Joon-Seok sat across from her. He did not start immediately. He was not a man who filled silence. Silence made him uncomfortable, which was one of the first things she had noticed about him. Most people she knew were afraid of silence. He had always lived inside it comfortably. She had liked that about him. She still liked it. That was the complicated part. Min Jae was with me for 6 years, he said. Not as an excuse, as context, and she received it as such. He came up through the same structure I did. He knew the organization from the inside because he helped build parts of it. He looked at the table, and he decided at some point in the last year that the direction I was moving, reducing exposure, separating the legitimate businesses, considering cooperation, was a direction he couldn't accept, because it would dismantle the thing he had helped build. He wanted to keep it. He wanted to keep what it gave him. There's a difference. He looked up. I was the obstacle to that, and I had become, he stopped, chose the next words with visible care. I had become distracted, in a way he could use. I'm the distraction. You're not a distraction. He said it with a quiet force that was different from his usual, even delivery. What I mean is that he saw that I had something I hadn't had before, something outside the organization, something that could be targeted. He held her gaze. He was right that I would come. He miscalculated everything else. He miscalculated me, she said. Something moved through Joon-Seok's face that was not quite a smile, but lived near one. Significantly, she breathed. She looked at her hands on her knees, her own hands, not his coat's pockets, her own lap. She had given the coat back somewhere between the sub-basement and the conference room. She was in her own clothes, her own uniform, which she was still wearing because there had been no opportunity to change, and would not be until she got home. I need to ask you something, she said. Anything. The 4 months. All of it. The cafe and the Thursdays and the coffee after my shifts. She looked at him directly. Was any of it not all of it? I'm not asking about all of it. Was any of it ever about the hotel? He held her gaze for the full length of the question and the silence after it. The first time I saw you, he said, slowly. I knew who you were in the sense that your name was on a list I had looked at. I knew you worked on the relevant floors. I knew your schedule. He paused. And then I saw you at the counter, and you were trying to work out whether accepting a coffee from a stranger was worth the cost of the interaction. And you decided it was. But you watched me the whole time in case you needed to change your decision. He stopped. I had not seen someone look at me like that in a very long time. Like I was a person whose intentions required evaluation. She waited. The second Thursday, he continued, I went back because I wanted to know if you'd be there. Not for the hotel. Not for Shaw. Because I wanted to know if you'd be there. He looked at the table, then back. I am not going to tell you that changes the fact that I knew things I didn't tell you. It doesn't change it. But you asked if any of it was real, and the answer is that all of it was real. The first minute was complicated. Everything after was real. Zariah sat with that. She sat with it the way you sat with something that you couldn't fold into a clean shape that had edges and weight, and resisted the categories you'd prepared for it. Real and complicated were not opposites. She had known that her whole life, had learned it early in the specific school of a South Side childhood, where love and hardship were not opposites either, and the honest thing was to hold both without pretending one canceled the other. I'm not going to tell you tonight what this is, she said, finally. Between us. I don't know tonight. I'm not in a place tonight to know. I understand. But I need you to understand something. She leaned forward slightly. The conversation we haven't had yet about what you are, what your organization has done, who has been hurt by it, and how that conversation is not optional. It is not something I will let you summarize or manage. I will have it in full. And it will be ugly, and I will say what I think, and you will hear it. He held her gaze without flinching. Yes. And after that conversation, I'll know better what I think. That's all I'm asking. You're not asking anything, she said. I'm telling you how it's going to go. The corner of his mouth moved. She saw it and did not acknowledge it, though she filed it the particular quality of it, the specific involuntary nature of it, the thing that was not performance. Yes, he said, you are. She left the Sterling Crown at 11:47 p.m. Not through the service entrance. She walked. Out through the revolving doors, at the front of the building, through the main entrance, past the concierge desk, where the staff watched her go, with expressions that ranged from shame to something closer to relief, on behalf of someone else's conscience. She walked through the lobby with her head level, and her shoulders carrying only their own weight, and her steps deliberate on the marble that she had cleaned 10,000 times. She did not hurry. She went through the doors, and the Chicago night received her cold and indifferent and utterly ordinary in the way that cities were moving. On the sidewalk going about their own evenings, the sterling crown rising behind her 44 floors into the dark, without any visible record of what had happened inside it. Joon-Seok walked out behind her. He did not try to walk beside her. He stood at the entrance and watched her go, which was the right thing, and she recognized it as the right thing, and did not look back. She walked to the train. Zariah Bell was awake. She was sitting at the kitchen table with the gospel program off, and a cup of tea that had gone cold at her elbow, and her reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead, which was what she did when she had been thinking hard about something, and had stopped pretending she was doing anything else. She looked up when Zariah came in. Zariah stood in the doorway of the kitchen in her uniform, which was wrinkled and smelled of industrial laundry detergent, and the specific combination of a hotel sub-basement and a November night. She had not cried on the train. She had sat in the second car from the back in the window seat and watched the city move past and held everything she was holding and not let any of it go, because she was not ready to let it go, yet and the train was not the place. Her mother looked at her. Zariah looked at her mother. Then she walked across the kitchen and sat down across from her at the table, and she put both hands flat on the surface. And she breathed. Delphine reached across and put her hands over Zariah's. She didn't ask. She waited, and Zariah told her. Not everything, not that night, not all at once, but enough. The lobby and the necklace and the firing and the footage and the document and the federal agents and Joon-Seok, whose name she said plainly without softening the context around it. She told it in the order it happened. She told it in the order it happened, which was not the order she fully understood it in yet, but understanding was different from witnessing, and she was still in the witness stage. Delphine listened. She listened the way she had always listened to hard things, without interrupting, without the anxious parental reflexes that would have been understandable but would have made it harder to finish. She listened with her hands over her daughter's hands, and her glasses still pushed up on her forehead, and her cold tea at her elbow, and the kitchen clock ticking in the particular way it had ticked since Zariah was 12 years old. When Zariah finished, Delphine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Did you keep your head?" "Yes." "The whole time?" "Yes." Delphine nodded. Not praise exactly, more like confirmation of something she had already known. "And this man?" "I don't know yet what this man is," Zariah said. "That's the honest answer." "That's a good answer." Delphine looked at their hands on the table. An honest "don't know" is worth more than a comfortable "yes." "I know. You still like him." Zariah looked at the table. "That's the complicated part, baby," her mother said gently. "The complicated part is always the part where the feeling doesn't cooperate with the situation. That's not a new problem, I know. Doesn't make it easier." No, Delphine squeezed her hands once and let go. She stood, and she went to the stove, and she put the kettle on again, because the first tea had been for worrying, and this was for something else, the kind of tea that was about the morning that came, after a night, about the sitting together in the kitchen, after the worst of it had passed. Zariah looked at the table. At the surface, she had known since childhood, with the small burn mark near the left edge, from a tea bag her father had set down carelessly once in 1999, and which had never been refinished because her mother said it was part of the table now. She thought about what she was going to do. Not tomorrow. Not the conversation with Joon-Seok, or the follow-up with Reyes, or the question of the settlement that someone at the Sterling Crown's ownership level would certainly be motivated to offer before the week was out. Not the long procedural work of what came next. She thought about the thing underneath all of that, the direction, the shape of the next phase of her life, the question of what a woman did with the knowledge that she had survived, a deliberate dismantling of everything she had built and had come through it with herself intact. She thought about the women she knew, the housekeepers and the home care workers, and the women at the laundromat, and the women at the church her mother attended, and the women in every building she had ever cleaned, who had done the same quiet, competent work with the same dignity and had received the same calibrated indifference in return. The ones who had been pushed out of their neighborhoods by the kind of financial operation that Shaw and Preston had been running. The ones who had been walked through lobbies in their own ways, by their own Prestons, with their own versions of a necklace planted on them. She had been the one with a camera that happened to catch it. She had been the one with Joon-Seok walking through the door. She had been the one where the truth came out in a lobby full of witnesses. Most of them didn't have any of that. She thought about what you did with surviving something that most people didn't survive. The kettle began. The settlement offer came on Monday. It came through a lawyer representing Sterling Crown's parent ownership group, which had moved swiftly to separate itself from Preston Vale and the events of Thursday night with the efficiency of a corporate body whose primary skill was exactly that kind of separation. The offer was significant. The lawyer presented it with the particular combination of generosity and urgency that communicated, "We are being generous because we would prefer not to be in a courtroom." Zariah read it twice. She called her own lawyer, a woman named Patricia Osei, who had been recommended by Agent Reyes, which was its own interesting data point, and Patricia read it and said it was fair and that Zariah could negotiate for more. "I don't want more," Zariah said. "I want it in writing that my record is clear and that the termination is expunged. That's in here. I want it to say why." Patricia paused. "Elaborate." "The termination notice will say, I was terminated following a false accusation that was subsequently demonstrated to be fabricated by hotel guests in coordination with hotel management. I want the word fabricated. I want the word demonstrated. I want anyone who requests my employment records for the next 40 years to see exactly what happened." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Then I like you," she said, and went to negotiate. The final settlement included the language. Zariah signed it on a Wednesday afternoon in Patricia's office, in a chair with a view of the lake that was gray and enormous and doing what the lake always did, which was exactly what it wanted, regardless of what anyone else was doing. She did not go back to the Sterling Crown. There was nothing there she needed. The conversation with Joon-Seok happened on a Thursday. She had chosen Thursday deliberately, though she did not tell him that. She met him in the cafe, where it had started, the small Korean-owned place near the hotel, which felt like the right location for the simple reason that it was the place before any of it. The place before she knew what she was sitting across from, and returning to it was a way of saying, "I'm starting from the real beginning, not the managed version." He was there when she arrived. He had brought coffee the good kind, the one he always knew she preferred, which should have been a small thing and wasn't entirely a small thing. She sat down. He looked at her across the table with the controlled stillness that she now understood fully what it covered and what it cost and why he maintained it. She looked at him without the managed version of herself either, tired around the eyes, certain in the jaw, both things true at once. She talked for a long time. She said what she had promised. She would say the full version, the ugly version, the version about what his organization's work meant when you lived in the neighborhoods where it operated. She had done research in the weeks between the lobby and this cafe, had learned things that had tightened her chest and made her sit very still at her kitchen table on a Sunday morning, and she said all of it. She did not soften it. She did not deliver it with performance, because it was not a performance. It was an accounting. He listened. He did not defend. He did not contextualize in the way of a man trying to reduce the weight of what he was hearing. He listened with the same full attention he had always given her, which was part of why this was so hard, and he absorbed it. And when she finished, he said, "You're right. About all of it." She looked at him. "I have spent a long time," he said carefully, "building something that required me not to look directly at what it cost. That is a specific kind of cowardice. I've known it was cowardice and done it anyway, because the alternative was losing the thing." He paused. "I'm losing the thing anyway. And what I'm finding out is that the thing was not actually worth what I told myself it was worth." "What are you finding it was worth?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Less than one honest Thursday morning," he said. She looked at him. She looked at her coffee. She looked at the window and the street outside, where Chicago was doing what it always did. Moving, enormous, indifferent to individual heartbreak, carrying its own history in its concrete and its wind. "Monday's conversation with Reyes," she said. "How did it go?" "Long." He held the cup with both hands. "There are agreements being structured. I cannot tell you everything that's in them. I can tell you that the legitimate businesses are being formally separated. I can tell you that the cooperation is substantive. And I can tell you that there are people in the organization who will not forgive me for it. He looked at her. Min Jae's arrest was Thursday morning. He is cooperating with federal investigators to reduce his own exposure. Some of what he tells them will come back to me. Are you going to prison? She asked it directly, the way she had asked everything, because she had decided weeks ago that she was done with the version of life where you asked things sideways because the direct versions was too uncomfortable. He held her gaze. I don't know. There are outcomes being negotiated that could go several ways. Reyes has been not an advocate, a fair assessor. He paused. What I know is that I am doing what I should have started doing earlier. I'm doing it now. That's the only thing I have to offer. It's not nothing, she said. It's not enough either. No, she looked at him. It's not, but it's the starting point. The cafe was quiet around them. The same small tables, the same counter, the same smell of coffee, and the winter that was thinking about becoming spring outside. She had been sitting in this cafe for 4 months drinking coffee, across from a man she thought she knew and had not known, and she was sitting in it now, knowing considerably more, and finding that more was not simpler, but it was real. She reached across the table and picked up her coffee. I'm going to open something, she said. A foundation. Training and professional development for women who have been where I was housekeeping, hospitality, service, work. Women who are good at what they do and get no ladder. She looked at the table. I know what it takes to do that work well. And I know what it costs when the work is all you're allowed. He was very still. I don't want your money in it, she said. Then after a pause, not directly, not with your name on it. I can't build something for those women on a foundation they'd have to explain. She met his eyes. But if there were a building in a different name, in an entity that was separate and clean and documented as legitimate, that's a different conversation. He understood what she was offering and what she was not offering. And both the offering and the withholding were visible in his face. Yes, he said. That's a different conversation. We'll have it, she said. When the other conversation is further along, he nodded once. They sat for a while longer without speaking, which was something they had always been able to do, and the ability to do it had not been damaged by what had happened between the first Thursday and this one, which was not a small thing. It was, in fact, one of the things she had come to the cafe to find out. 6 months later, Zariah Bell stood inside a building on the south side of Chicago and looked at 3 women in their late 40s who were sitting at a table with notebooks and learning, for the first time in their professional lives, that their knowledge had a name and their skill had a structure, and what they had been doing for decades was called hospitality management. And there were people who were paid 3 times their salary for knowing half as much. The building was a converted commercial space, clean and practical, with good light from the east windows, and a kitchen that worked, and a conference room that smelled like new carpet because the carpet was new. The sign above the entrance read, Bell Foundation in clean block letters, and Zariah had stood outside and looked at it for 3 minutes on the morning. It went up and felt something she didn't have a single word for. She still wore the same size. She had not changed her body to match what had changed around it. She had not decided that surviving a public humiliation required becoming someone else's version of acceptable. She was the same woman who had stood in the lobby in her uniform and held her ground, larger, louder, more complicated than the version people had tried to reduce her to, and that woman was the one who ran the foundation, taught the workshops, made the calls, sat across from funds and city officials and women in service industry uniforms who had been told their whole careers that they were the bottom of the ladder. She told them they had misread the ladder. On a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the foundation opened, she was at her desk working through a grant proposal when her phone lit up. Joon-Seok. She looked at the phone for a moment. Then she picked it up. The Reyes situation, he said when she answered. No preamble. He had learned that she preferred no preamble. Or perhaps he had always known. There's a development I thought you should hear from me. Tell me, he told her. The federal case had moved into a phase she didn't understand entirely in legal terms, but understood in human terms, a phase where the cooperation he had provided was being formally recognized, which was not immunity and was not absolution, but was something a documented accounting of a man moving in a different direction than the one he had been moving in. The path forward was long and involved lawyers and oversight, and conditions she'd hear more about over time. But it was a path. It existed. She listened to the whole thing. Okay, she said when he was finished. A pause on his end. That's all. What were you expecting? I don't know. Something more. It's a Wednesday, she said. I have a grant proposal due Friday. The development is good. I'll have more thoughts about it over the weekend. She looked out the window of her office at the South Side Street below, which was doing what South Side Streets did, which was being full of life. You can bring coffee Sunday. The good kind. A longer pause this time. The kind that had weight in it. Sunday, he said. 3 o'clock. I'll be there. She put the phone down and went back to the grant proposal, and through the window she could hear the 3 women in the conference room. One of them had made a joke that the others were laughing at. The free, uncomplicated laugh of women who had found themselves in a room where their presence required no apology, and the sound of it came through the wall and sat in the office with her while she worked. The Sterling Crown Hotel was 7 miles north. She did not think about it every day. She thought about it less often than she had expected, which was its own kind of information. The building that had held 9 years of her life was 7 miles away, doing what it had always done, being expensive and beautiful and indifferent, and she was here. And here was something she had built with her own name on it. They had walked her through that lobby like a verdict. She had turned the verdict into a different sentence, not because a mafia boss arrived and saved her, because the truth was there, and she had stayed on her feet long enough for it to come out. And when it came out, she had known what to do with it. And what she had done with it was these women in this room, this building, this foundation, this future that did not require her to be anyone other than the woman she had always been. She looked at the grant proposal. She looked at the window. She went back to work.